Chapter 260 Unparalleled Anomaly. Faced with Conrad's new, monstrous form, both Bayes and Earhart were forced to accept the gravity of the situation. Again, they exchanged a glance through which they set aside all differences to tackle this horrific foe. Extreme light. Activating his divine physique, Bayes turned into a light beam and shot toward Conrad. The extreme light physique he possessed was the polar opposite of Yvonne's extreme dark physique. With it, he could move as fast as light itself and wielded many wondrous abilities. In an instant, Bayes reappeared before Conrad and punched out. Massive star force erupted, the air crackled, space was distorted, and with the extreme speed empowering it, this simple punch could turn the average star-fusing saint into meat paste. However, Conrad raised one of his left forearms and effortlessly blocked the blow. The collision between his translucent arm and Bayes' golden fist, releasing an explosion of sound waves that sent ripples throughout the air. Below them, the ground crackled, with tremors spreading throughout the Void domain. If this battle proceeded in such fashion, everything across several thousand miles, the entirety of the Void domain, faced destruction. The two pale-skinned beauties on Conrad's chariot waved their hands, releasing a new force field that restrained the damages and confined the shockwaves to several miles. Master ordered us to ensure the damage would be kept to a minimum. Mistress doesn't need to worry, they said toward Yvonne, who was startled to see their cultivation standing at the 9th level of the Restoration Beast rank. Clearly, Conrad's gains within the tower had reached an unfathomable level. A festival of blows began. Having cultivated the 100-flower scripture to the pinnacle, and with the lust embodiment bloodline flowing within his veins, Conrad's speed didn't lose out to Bayes. In a flash, Bayes rained thousands of punches which Conrad all blocked with 50 hands, while countering with blows of his own. With each punch Conrad knocked off, Bayes received 2 on either side of his jaw, throat, abdomen, sternum. Bayes' golden body was abused by thousands of relentless blows, each carrying the force of mountains. If at first, his golden body allowed him to endure, he quickly became unable to shoulder the brutal hammering and turned into a punching ball. Arg! Conrad slammed 3 elbows into Bayes' face, 1 in his throat and dozens on his body, then sent him flying backward with a back kick. His golden body fractured, and blood gushed from his throat. "Don't get too confident," Earhart roared, before stretching out his hands. Solar flare. In a deafening explosion, golden flames and sunrays erupted, barreling into Conrad, who sneered at the move. Not attempting to evade, Conrad stretched out his hands, and as the solar explosion reached them, it stopped, then began shrinking until it was nothing more than a thumb-sized golden flame ball. Conrad clenched one of his fists around it, and it vanished from sight. Earhart was startled. "Impossible. What kind of bloodline do you possess that solar force is that insignificant before you?" The startled Earhart asked. Were it not for the jade-green hairs and light swirling around Conrad, as well as the monstrous 100-armed giant form he currently wielded, Earhart would have truly taken him for a Ravmalak, the masters of the stars. "Your founder's blood," Conrad leisurely replied, then turned into a green light beam to barrel into Earhart with 50 elbow strikes. Without a golden body to protect him, Earhart directly flew toward the ground, breaking through several walls of the Void Palace before cratering. Pooh! The pain too strong for his brain to process, his world spun, while his eyes widened in disbelief. And before he could regain his composure, Conrad was again upon him with a descending axe kick. His heel sent Earhart sinking deeper into the ground while the crater around him widened under the shockwave. "It is always I who rob others' women. When was it time for me to suffer the same fate? You are 10,000 years too early," Conrad stated while pulling Earhart by the leg and tossing him toward a distant wall. All the bones in his body crackled, threatening to rupture under the unprecedented abuse. But before Conrad could shoot toward him, a voice boomed at his back, carrying alongside it a massive surge of magical power. 6 circle spell, Chaos Splendor. Eyes joined his hands, condensing 6 magical circles from which a chaos ring emerged. The chaos ring expanded, then exploded in chaotic particles that again merged to release a dreadful explosion of chaos forces. Although Conrad had seen the same spell employed by Ison, in Eyes' hands, its might reached an unprecedented height. Conrad didn't turn, vanishing to reappear before the recovering Earhart. Meanwhile, his pure self appeared where he previously stood. Joining its 100 hands, it raised 6 towering peach blossom trees around which rose petals swirled. The trees and petals released a purple force field that collided with and neutralized Eyes' spell. The pure self then shot toward Eyes, while the real Conrad pummeled Earhart. Conrad sent Earhart spiraling in the sky with a knee blow in his sternum, while his pure self pedaled Eyes' face. The two flew toward opposite locations and tumbled in an eruption of dust. A crushing silence descended on the scene, and although they possessed utmost confidence in Conrad's abilities, even Yvonne, Else, and Verena were scared witless. Abnormal. This is completely abnormal. And indeed, as they analyzed the newly materialized pure self, all realized that Conrad's cultivation was merely at the rising saint rank. Did the laws of cultivation get reversed as I slept? How can this concentration of earthshaking might possibly be a rising saint? A startled Hubert wondered in awe. And although Conrad's face reminisced him of the fake eunuch he met within Housecracked, Hubert simply couldn't believe that the two were the same. Meanwhile, the severely battered duo rose from the rubble, their clothes torn, with blood dripping from all their orifices while hundreds of hematomas swelled on their bodies. When they too realized their opponent's cultivation level, despair settled within their hearts. Earhart, in particular, couldn't accept this blow. Although Yvonne's existence humbled him, he'd always considered himself a top prodigy only shackled by the mortal realm's conditions. But now, that Conrad appeared with a cultivation and strength that seemed to be asking him, "If you are a prodigy, what am I?" Chapter 261 Ancestral Glory 9 Luminaries, Divine Artifacts, Strongest Abilities. Force a quick conclusion. Eyes exclaimed through a mental message that pulled Earhart out of his torpor. Eyes waved his hand, summoning a bronze disc while Earhart released a set of 6 flying knives that merged in a single one. Both weapons rippled with divine power. But again, Conrad remained unperturbed. Meanwhile, within the Holy Flame City, a new wave of changes occurred. Led by the third Infernal Elder's oldest son, 10-star connecting Saint Soul Fiends descended on the von Jurgen's imperial palace and forced the new emperor into abdication before welcoming Ulrich back on the throne. Faced with the Soul Fiends' absolute might, none dared complain, and without trouble, Ulrich reassumed control of the imperial palace. A pity that Adalwin is not present, but it's fine. While he exhausts his strength against the void, these gentlemen will remove his head. Ulrich inferred, confident that the situation was under control. But then, the dreadful fluctuations of divine power soared into the sky, creating a celestial phenomenon that allowed all above the holy rank to realize that a shocking battle was currently occurring within the void domain. Eyes Chaos Disc? The third Infernal Elder's son wondered, while locking his holy sense on the distant scene. And indeed, there he recognized Eyes Circer's presence. "We must investigate this. All of you with me." And before Ulrich could say anything, the soul fiends all turned into light beams and shot toward the battleground. Ulrich's eyes contorted into a frown. "This can't be good. I must hurry and complete the formation, then refine the empire." Within her brothel, Guliston's true body stood with Diana by her side. However, while Guliston observed the concentration of divine power, her eyes contorted into a frown. Could Earhart Worth corner Eyes to this extent? Impossible. Casting her divine sense on the scene, she witnessed the ongoing battle in all its splendor, seeing a tranquil and unblemished Conrad facing 2 experts at the summit of the Holy Road. Experts whose battle power somewhat surpassed the early stage of the divine seed rank. Her eyes widened in disbelief. "This can't be good." She then shifted her attention onto Diana, who politely stood by her side. Can you explain that? I'm afraid I can't. Although he started to accept me and claimed my body, throughout this trip, he never allowed me to get a thorough understanding of his secrets and still maintained some vigilance. For that reason, he also made me leave the tower early. Therefore, I don't know much about his growth, strength origin, and current battle power. I only know that his cultivation is at the rising saint rank. Diana faithfully replied. Arching her eyebrows, Gulistan shifted her eyes back onto the battleground. Well, and here I was hoping he'd learn to rely on me. What a horrible miscalculation. Father won't be pleased. To save, yes or no? Bay Eyes flung his disc into the air, and it expanded until it covered the void sky. His hands then moved in incantation gestures. 6-circle spell, Chaos Nova. Again, 6 circles appeared, and from them, vast chaos force erupted to morph into a gigantic chaos star that sapped the life of everything in its vicinity and enfeebled Bay Eyes' targets. Meanwhile, Earhart didn't stay idle. The miniature sun above his head expanded into a 100 meters wide sun. 6-circle spell, Solar Fury. A dazzling, gigantic sunbeam erupted from the artificial sun and shot toward Conrad while the Chaos Star released an even more dreadful strike still aimed at him. Simultaneously, the two experts summoned their 3 pure selves which controlled their divine artifacts in their stead and used their most potent physique abilities to deliver a succession of lethal blows on Conrad. Boom! An earth-shaking explosion of golden light and darkness engulfed the area where Conrad remained. The energy column pierced the sky, alarming all of the Holy Continent's denizens, invisible from all across the ancient crystal world. Ha 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 ha, dead. He's finally dead. Earhart screamed for all to hear. And though he didn't showcase such glee, Bay Eyes was inclined to agree. All their trump cards had been laid out. Even an early-stage Divine Seed expert couldn't survive this strike. Now, from the Infernal Cults and Celestial Church's headquarters, dozens of pairs of eyes observed this startling event occurring within the secular world. But as they witnessed the final strike, not many doubted that Conrad's life had come to an end. Alas, all those who did were proven wrong, because from the dust and ashes, a 1,000 meters tall, 100-armed giant appeared. That giant sat cross-legged within the sky, 2 hands lying on his thighs while the others remained outstretched. A jade-green sphere surrounded that giant, standing firm even after this shocking strike. Earhart despaired. Bay Eyes was scared witless. Time to end this game. Ancestral Glory. 9 luminaries. Demons possessed lineage weapons. Devis, ancestral glories. Conrad now summoned his mightiest Deva ability. The Ravmalaka's ancestral glory transformed by his Nephilim blood. A jade-green sun, a glittering white moon, and 7 other celestial bodies appeared within the air and swirled around him. The 9 luminaries took a position within the atmosphere, forming an inviolable domain of overflowing cosmic energies. Within that domain, neither Earhart nor Bay Eyes could use their star force. Their strength plummeted, and they felt trapped in an interstellar realm from which they could never escape. Meanwhile, Conrad vanished, merging with the interstellar realm. Shit, Bay Eyes cursed. At that time, the soul fiends that helped Ulrich back on his throne arrived, but when they witnessed the ancestral glory, all turned heels and ran. Alas, it was far too late. Since you decided to join the fun, there is no need to turn tail. The gigantic Conrad declared from an unknown dimension, then joined all his 100 hands together. 9 luminaries strike. Multicolor beams erupted from the 9 stellar bodies and merged in a multicolor sphere which then expanded and exploded in an enthralling light festival. The stellar explosion engulfed everything in Conrad's domain. The soul fiends directly turned into ashes while the 3rd infernal elder's son, Bay Eyes, and Earhart were turned into charred messes. The 3 collapsed on the ground, unconscious and unable to muster the tiniest bit of cultivation. Their artifacts tumbled, and their pure selves turned into dust. With that blow, Conrad could have killed them all. However, he chose to preserve those three's lives for the next part of his plan. Chapter 262 He Deserves to be Damned. From the Void Domain to the Celestial Church, from the Celestial Church to the Infernal Cult, the breeze of silence blew. And if only for an instant, none dared make a noise. Although for the leaders of the two religious factions, the battle's level was by no means startling, the implications were dreadful. Meanwhile, the weakest elders didn't doubt they wouldn't have fared any better than Bayeyes and Earhart did. Worse, because of timing and distance, they didn't have the opportunity to analyze Conrad's pure self while his transformation skill made them unable to grasp his cultivation level. Therefore, a plethora of questions spread within the minds of protectors, elders, and leaders. Who was that youth? What was his cultivation level? Where did he hail from? His last ability and final strike were oddly similar to the Ravmalaka's ancestral glory. Though there are substantial differences, their lineage is definitely connected. But at the same time, his current form bears a striking resemblance to Titans. What is he? A new kind of hybrid? The Celestial Church leader wondered, but quickly dismissed the idea. While a hybridism between Deva and humans wasn't impossible, if the two bloodlines were of the same level, the result would be, at best, a cripple. At worst, a stillborn. Ravmalaks and Titans were at the same level. A functional child of the two was unlikely. Moreover, Titans were reclusive individuals that never mixed with other races. They took their race's purity even more seriously than many high-ranking Devis and demons. How could such a breach occur? Can someone tell me when this creature appeared within our world? The infernal cult leader asked his elder council. None had an answer to provide and turned their eyes toward the third elder whose son was one of the victims. The Cural Soul Fiends ranked fourth among the infernal cult's houses. Their patriarch always held high positions. The third elder was the contemporary Cural Patriarch, an early-stage divine transformation expert. With his status and strength, to see his eldest son charred in such a callous manner was absolutely unbearable. However, he could only restrain himself. First, his house was never supposed to be there. Hastily stepping into the Celestial Church's territory could end up hastening the Holy War. At worst, this was a crime that would bring House Cural many sanctions. Second, someone else had yet to show his stance. And indeed, in a twister of golden light, an olive-skinned middle-aged man appeared on the scene. Seeing him, the infernal cult leader's lips curled into a smile. Great Elder, welcome. Can you explain the meaning of this? The infernal cult leader asked while aiming his finger at the image of Bayeyes' charred body. The infernal cult's great elder, Birkenserker, cast a brief glance at the image, then took his great elder seat. Bayeyes acted on his own and poached clan experts to indulge in personal vices. That is his first crime. Second, without the higher-ups' approval, he dared stir trouble within the Celestial Church's territory, disregarding his status as an infernal protector. Third, and most important of all, he lost. With those three crimes, he deserves to be damned, and I will not intervene in this matter. Cult leader, feel free to handle it as you please. Birkin declared with a calm and indifferent tone, then closed his eyes. His words startled the other elders who didn't expect such a cold stance. The infernal cult leader nodded in approval. Birkin, I've always said that though human, you are a better blood fiend than many of my kin. When we ascend to the infernal realm, you should let go of Lord Talroth and embrace the thigh of Lord Asherah. The infernal cult leader coolly advised, his tone leaving no insight on his real thoughts. Third Elder, what about you? The inquiry took the third elder aback. Unlike Birkin, he cared very much for his son's life, and certainly wouldn't allow him to face mishap. Alas, although he ranked among the mightiest experts of the infernal cult, compared to the likes of Birkin and the cult leader, his strength was negligible. Without delay, he dropped on his knees and bowed with clasped hands. Cult leader, first, although my son and Bayeyes are guilty and deserve to be punished, it is the infernal cult that should administrate the punishment. Allowing outsiders to sentence them in our stead is an insult to the infernal cult's dignity. Second, that youth's background is doubtful. Perhaps he's a celestial realm deva summoned by the celestial church to tackle us during the Holy War. Perhaps he's a remnant of the celestial founder's bloodline we knew nothing of. But if he were, why is he standing against the celestial church's prime disciple? In one case or another, we must investigate him and grasp the full picture. Otherwise, variables are bound to arise. And regardless of his true cultivation, if the strength he displayed is the limit, we only need to dispatch several elders to deal with him. I'm willing to personally lead my clan's elders to probe his depth and remove a potential scourge. The third elder solemnly offered, and hearing his words, many elders were forced to agree. At the very least, they should investigate this youth's background and remove a potential hidden danger before it could blossom. Very well. As I recall, Gulistan should also have a presence in the Holy Continent. Have her assist you. Great Elder, any objection? None whatsoever. I will make the arrangements. Birkin directly replied to the infernal cult leader's inquiry, then vanished in a golden haze. Meanwhile, the Celestial Church's Elder Council was having a similar talk, except that this time, the moon spirits were trying to find fault on Earhart and create trouble for the leading sun spirits. Church leader, the prime disciple is rash and impetuous, his Tao heart flawed, and his cultivation not progressing at the necessary pace. Although he's your eldest son, you can't keep indulging him in such a glaring manner. And even if you wish to, before that, you should remove his position as prime disciple. Other, worthier candidates have risen and are willing to fight for the spot. Please take the grand picture into account and don't hamper the next generation's development because of personal feelings. The Celestial Church's great elder declared in an uncompromising stance. For the last 3 generations, the Worth Sun spirit had occupied the church leader seat, preventing the Kornberg moon spirits from having a turn. With Earhart's widespread debacle, the Kornberg patriarch was determined to snatch the prime disciple position for his son. In any case, he wasn't any worse than Earhart. Your words are sensible. If he cannot free himself from fetters and perfect his Tao heart, the prime disciple position should be given to a worthier candidate. We can discuss the new options after retrieving him. The church leader directly replied, startling his peers. Hence, both the Celestial Church and the Infernal Cult dispatched elders toward the Holy Continent. More precisely, toward the Void Domain. From the ancient crystal world's 2 highest mountain ranges, several dreadful auras erupted and shot toward the Void Domain, the pressure surrounding them alarming the secular world. Mortals or saints, none could avoid shivering before such force. But Conrad, whose size had been reduced to the usual one, 9 meters, welcomed them with a smile. Part 4. Conning. Chapter 263. The Lord be praised. With a wave of his hands, Conrad lifted the 3 experts from the ground, holding them in suspension around him. What are you trying to do? You can't possibly hope to blackmail them, right? Else inquired. Attempting to use those 3 captives to blackmail the entire Celestial Church and Infernal Cult was a pipe dream. Moreover, if an expert of the divine blood rank or above appeared, before Conrad could make a move, the hostages would be recovered, and his body split in 2. Therefore, she couldn't suppress her apprehension. On the contrary, Yvonne was undisturbed and focused her attention on Verena, who remained hidden within the Void Palace. Although due to his constant neglect, Verena's relationship with her father was at best strained, he still was her father. To see him obliterated in such a manner was undoubtedly a harsh blow, a blow that'd require some time and distraction to heal. With their relationship having grown closer over the last month, Yvonne naturally wished to ease the process. Alas, she didn't have the required skill set. Only Conrad could promptly handle the job. As for the incoming sages, since Conrad dared act in such a flamboyant manner, Yvonne didn't doubt that he had a dastardly plan in store. Hence, there was no need for worries. They could just sit and enjoy the show. And indeed, Conrad was fully prepared. Just sit tight and enjoy the show. There is absolutely no need for worries. He replied toward Else and summoned a thumb-sized black tower within his hand. This was the miniature version of the Tower of Rebirth. With his current cultivation, Although he now owned the tower, Conrad simply couldn't display its offensive power. At least, he would need to reach the divine rank beforehand. But in the meantime, the tower's spiritual consciousness could handle some tasks. 7 light beams flew from the distance and landed before Conrad. Leading them was Gulistan, whose impassible face didn't reveal any emotions. It's her true body, a late-stage divine transformation cultivation base. Celine's voice echoed within Conrad's mind. Unfazed, he raised his eyes toward her. "Welcome, Lady Gulistan." Hearing the Lady Gulistan, Gulistan's face contorted into a small frown. "Your growth speed has outpaced all my expectations. I acknowledge I made a terrible move. However, you can't possibly think that with your current strength, you can go against both the Celestial Church and the Infernal Cult, right?" She began in a mental message, but Conrad remained silent. "How about this? Surrender and follow me back to House Circer. I can guarantee that the matter will end as such and that no one will dare trouble you." She offered, and as the words echoed within his ears, Conrad's smile broadened. "Gulistan, you don't understand me at all. It's fine. In the future, I will make you understand. But in the meantime..." 7 other light beams appeared, this time, Celestial Church sages. Seeing them, the third infernal elder frowned. "War Chief, what are we waiting for? We must act with haste, lest those Celestial Church worms snatch him." And without waiting for Gulistan's reply, he carried on. "Boy, I don't know where you hail from, and it doesn't matter. This is the ancient crystal world. The people of the infernal cult can't be maltreated with impunity. If you release them on your own accord and surrender yourself to our examinations, we will not only spare you but give you key training. What do you say?" The third elder's voice thundered within the air. And hearing this, the Mets and Voight clansmen in the vicinity were startled. Clearly, more than retrieving hostages, it was Conrad's true origins that aroused the interest of the two factions. And indeed, don't listen to him. Come with us instead. We shall no longer pursue this matter and give you the training only we can. After all, you clearly possess a connection to the Ravmalak, while our founder was herself of Ravmalak descent. Only in the Celestial Church can you fully blossom." The leading Celestial Church elder proclaimed. Better than anyone, they knew Conrad didn't come from the higher realm, or more precisely, that he didn't come from the celestial realm. If he did, they would know. Therefore, regardless of his origin, he was an ancient crystal world native. That being the case, they had no scruples. However, hearing the offers, Conrad burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha ha! Are you taking me for a 3 years old? If I follow either of you, at best, I will go under a scalpel. At worst, whoops." Conrad began without stopping his brash laughter, and instantaneously, tension rose. "Also, you are mistaken. If there is anyone in need of making concession, it is you, not me. You see, I'm the mortal avatar of the Profane Prince, the one true God. Your juniors have insulted his profane highness, and he demands their heads on a pike. I merely enforce his will, and there is nothing I can do about that. In 3 days, they will be publicly executed. As the saying goes, don't blame the messenger." Carried by his holy force, Conrad's words spread through several thousands of miles, his announcement making the gathered sages no longer take him seriously. So he's nothing more than a lunatic? The leading Celestial Church elder thought in disappointment. Only Gulistan felt an awful sense of foreboding. Moreover, due to your two factions' incessant meddling with his chosen land, the Profane Prince commands that henceforth no one above the holy rank can step into the holy continent. Conrad pursued, then raised his hand. The thumb-sized tower expanded to reach a full 100-meter, and as soon as it appeared, all experts recognized it. Their eyes widened in fright. At the same time, Conrad dispelled his transformation skill to make his real cultivation and the level of his physiques evident to all. But before the tower, such a revelation wasn't worth mentioning. The tower? The Tower of Rebirth? How could this be? An imitation. It must be an imitation. All agreed. But when they aimed their divine sense at the tower's initial location, they were startled to see that it was no longer there. What nonsense is this? How does a thing that size suddenly disappear? But while they wallowed in consternation, Godforce burst from the tower and morphed into a light screen that spread throughout the holy continent. Tarnation. Gulistan cursed, but to no avail. Bamstar. All the divine rank experts caught in the light screen were slammed out of the holy continent, shooting across the sky, to crater within the barbarian continent. The Lord be praised. The profane prince is merciful and doesn't wish to shed precious sage blood. Therefore, he gives you this warning and banishes you from the holy continent. In 3 days, your juniors will be executed before the public. But in the meantime, they will be flayed one piece at a time, until only the meat beneath their skin remains. If you still don't know proper limitations, you can't blame His Profane Highness for slaughtering your lot. Conrad proclaimed with his hands joined in a prayer sign, and his bright smile unchanged. Dear church and cult friends, please don't disappoint my expectation. Hearing Conrad's announcement, Gulistan, who now lied in a pile of dirt, felt a new wave of confusion. Something is wrong here. Why did he so easily reveal his real cultivation and physique levels? Why such a gaudy execution? Why 3 days? Chapter 264 I Am a God. The headquarters of the Celestial Church was a floating domain located above the Holy Continent's highest mountain at more than 50,000 meters of altitude. Therefore, the tower's light screen didn't reach it. However, the legions of disciples and priests that occupied the mountain range were now cut from the headquarters, or more precisely, cut from the leadership of the divine rank experts. At first, when the tower's light screen ejected them all from the Holy Continent, the celestial and infernal elders believed Conrad's words exaggerated. But following a brief analysis of the screen, they realized the seriousness of the situation. An anti-divine power ward. Without the caster's permission, anyone with divine power cannot step inside. Hateful. Incomparably hateful. The leading church elder exclaimed while slapping his thigh. And though the celestial church was the one suffering the harshest slap of face, the infernal cult elders couldn't take pleasure in their nemesis' misfortune. They went in to rescue captives and were exiled from the land in a single blow. Now, Baei's and the third elder's son's fates remained within that lunatic's hands. What was there to gloat about? Meanwhile, Conrad's words still echoed within their minds. The third elder, in particular, could barely restrain himself. In 3 days, your juniors will be executed before the public. But in the meantime, they will be flayed one piece at a time, until only the meat beneath their skin remains. Whether that so-called mortal avatar of the one true God was a madman or not, fact remained that he now held the initiative, and if left unchecked, was free to do as he saw fit. Reminiscing the sight of his son's charred body and imagining him getting flayed before a public of mortal ants, the third elder could no longer contain his emotions. Boy, don't lose yourself in complacency. Although your screen prevents divine rank experts from stepping into the holy rank, while maintaining it, you can't use the tower for anything else. Meanwhile, our two factions each possess more than 100-star fusing saints, 300-star manifesting saints, and 500-star connecting saints. To say nothing of the dozens of quasi-sages, puppets, and legions of troops. Meanwhile, we can command the barbarian continent's tens of millions of soldiers to coordinate with us and lay waste on the holy continent. With your cultivation alone, do you really think you can stop us all? If you know what's right for you, turn the hostages into shields and sue for peace. The third cult elder roared and carried by his vast divine force, his words echoed throughout the ancient crystal world. And indeed, this time, they mirrored the thoughts of both the celestial and infernal leaders. If Conrad insisted on shaming them to this extent, they didn't mind temporarily joining hands to put down his arrogance and exterminate anyone remotely connected to him. The infernal cult leader would act for his faction's prestige. The celestial church leader for both his faction and his son's life. Neither believed that Conrad was so muddled as to risk a hopeless battle for a brief moment of elation. After all, With his rising saint cultivation now revealed, they didn't doubt that even without their sages, they could take care of him. Although his bloodline is formidable, a rising saint is a rising saint. The bulk of his strength must come from his physiques. A high-grade, mastered holy physique already makes him as powerful as a star-fusing saint. Add to that a few divine physiques plus a dreadful bloodline, and today's result isn't hard to accept. However, with that alone, he cannot face our forces. Better than anyone, he should understand that. Moreover, with his cultivation, his control over the tower should be minimal. This is probably as far as he can go. Perhaps he merely wished to threaten us into surrendering some benefits. The celestial church leader assessed, his words reassuring his wife who stood at his right. However, Conrad's next words against startled them all. Ha 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 ha. Sue for peace? Harebrained imbecile. Does a giant need to discuss peace with ants? Does a god need to bargain with mortals? How bold. How conceited. Conrad jeered, his words clearly echoing within the ears of his interlocutors. Else, Verena and even Yvonne were startled and failed to grasp why Conrad adopted such a crass, provocative stance. I have shown you enough leniency. Since you don't cherish my kindness, I naturally must enhance the punishment. The previous wasn't enough? No problem, I'm very creative. Your lads will experience hell on earth and crave death from the bottom of their hearts. Only then will I offer them due salvation. Your threats only serve to worsen how I treat them before their inexorable demise. As for your troops, joke. I am God. What need I fear from insignificant mortals? Conrad roared with his arms outstretched, and seeing this, the experts of both factions came to one conclusion. He's stark raving mad. Unwilling to waste more of their breath, they turned into light beams and returned to their respective headquarters, ready to join hands to prepare the most dreadful assault in the history of the ancient crystal world. Meanwhile, Gulistan, who stood before the light screen, finally understood the ploy. It's a trap. He wants them to dispatch troops. The more, the better, or so it seems. But what card does he still possesses that he doesn't fear such an armada and instead does everything possible to invite it? She wondered. Clearly, Conrad first laid out his full arsenal for all to see, then goaded the two factions into collaborating with a false display of madness and megalomania. Not only her, but Verena, Yvonne, and else all came to the same conclusion. In a twister of golden light, Gulistan vanished and reappeared within House Circer, before her father, Birkin, who now stood on top of a tower, with his hands crossed beneath his back. What are your thoughts? Birkin asked without turning toward Gulistan. The answer lies in what became of his demonic blood. I'm inclined to think he turned into some kind of Nephilim. That boy is as cruel as he is crafty. Since he dares invite a combined assault, he must have confidence in his ability to suppress it. Gulistan replied. Now the question is, what do we do? If the cult leader wishes to dispatch troops, we can't easily stay out of this. But if we do join the war effort, I'm afraid we're sending our people into surefire destruction. Hearing this, Birkin sneered. And whose fault is that? Before such an inquiry, Gulistan could only give a helpless shrug. I blame the butterflies in the east. Meanwhile, Ulrich was about to make a getaway. Following the Kural Soul Fiend's annihilation and the exchange between that avatar of the Profane Prince and the two factions, he realized that he once again needed to evacuate the country. No, this time, he should turn into a commoner and hide within the barbarian continent. Joke. Regardless of how the events ended, that lunatic clearly wasn't someone he could confront. For now, he could only retreat and bide his time. Alas, as he rushed out of the imperial city, an invisible force locked him mid-flight, preventing his escape. Shit. Adoptive father, we father and son didn't even have time to catch up that you're again making a getaway? How disheartening. How heartless. Chapter 265 The Greatest Cuck in History. Night still hanged within the sky when the voice reverberated within Ulrich's mind. And at first, though mild, This foreign voice's tone filled him with a profound sense of apprehension. But when his brain registered the words, his eyes widened in disbelief. Adoptive father? Conrad? He wondered out loud, waves of consternation undulating within his eyes. And as if to answer him, a massive golden chariot cleaved the dark sky to stop above him. If the dreadful cultivation rippling from the crimson tiger was startling enough, when Ulrich's eyes locked on those occupying the seats, his face twisted into an ugly grimace. Ignoring the two pale-skinned beauties, his eyes went between the remaining four. Yvonne, Verena, Else, and a jade-green-haired man whose Empyrean looks immediately snatched attention. With Yvonne resting on his right arm, Else on his left, and Verena on his lap, his identity wasn't hard to guess. "It's you. You finally deigned to show yourself." Ulrich hissed through clenched teeth. With almost 1,000 years of existence, he'd experienced many events. However, without a shred of doubt, his greatest shame stemmed from the teenage-looking man sitting on this chariot, surrounded by women that, by right, should belong to him. As he witnessed this scene, his eyes went bloodshot, his nails dug through his palms, and his heart wildly beat. Alas, suppressed midair, he could neither advance nor retreat. Finally, adoptive father, having been by your side for so long, how could you possibly use the word finally? Conrad asked in a tone that showcased profound heartbreak. Confusion again flashed within Ulrich's eyes, covering his soaring hatred. What do you mean by th? But then, ordered images swirled within his mind. First, Ulrich recalled the imperial eunuch that brought him news of Yvonne's odd behavior. "Your Majesty, for the past week, Her Grace has been acting in suspicious manners. From morning to evening, she wards her entire courtyard through semi-holy force, preventing anyone from peeping while at night. She does the same to her chambers. Any variables potentially leading to this? This coincides with the appearance of a new eunuch boy. Not long afterward, Her Grace's strange behavior began. I haven't had time to investigate him yet, but I suspect." Then, his mind jumped to the day Verena introduced Conrad to him. Who might this child be? He's a human eunuch boy that entered the palace several months ago. I spotted him by chance and recognized his talent. I've been training him ever since, hoping that I could present him to your Majesty as a new court eunuch when he broke through the Grand Priest rank. Finally, he landed on the scene of Adler's last words. "Father, for the sake of supreme power, across centuries you have toyed with your relatives and loved ones. As a power-hungry monster, I can't blame you, but knowing that a son will overthrow your rule and take your life, I die without regrets." Upon assembling the three events, a horrifying thought emerged within Ulrich's mind, and his eyes widened with fright. Impossible, this is impossible. You can't possibly be Dash. But before he could finish his words, in a twister of jade light, Conrad's attire changed, becoming the imperial duke robe Ulrich personally prepared for him. Then, the matching crown and boots appeared on his head and around his feet. His appearance then morphed into that of an effeminate eunuch teen, the appearance Ulrich associated with the name Conrad. Seeing all his fears realized, Ulrich was struck speechless. His mouth curved into an O shape, and he struggled to aim a wobbling index at Conrad. No, a trick. This is a trick." He tried to reassure himself. However, "I'm afraid it isn't. Or should I tell you the mnemonics of the infernal soul-devouring art to convince you of this truth?" Conrad promptly brought him back to reality, and Ulrich's eyes almost cracked. Traitor, despicable traitor. We treated you so well, better than our true-born children. Introduced you to the formation path. Passed on to you our knowledge, our experience, our mightiest art. How could you? You have no conscience. Damn your father. Damn your mother. Damn all your ancestors. And damn you to hell." Ulrich roared, and imagining how Conrad bedded his consorts under his nose, he felt the green on his head grow glossier. Hearing this, Conrad shook his head. "Adoptive father, You can't say it like that. Were it not for you working so arduously to bring us together, how could it be so simple for me to lay hands on them? Think about it. Nils, Verena, Yvonne. Among them, who wasn't pushed away by your treachery. As your son, I merely did my filial duty of mending the wounds you caused. Conrad replied, his tone mixing righteousness and lamentation. Hearing Nils' name added to the list, Ulrich's grief intensified. You can't be SE. But before he could finish his words, Conrad's holy flame avatar appeared and stretched out his hand, causing Nils to emerge from his space bracelet. As soon as she did, she turned toward Conrad, and seeing him surrounded by women she should by right call mothers, flabbergasted, Nils didn't know if she should leap into his arms or hide in a corner. Unwilling to let her flounder, Conrad waved his hand, and pulled by an irresistible telekinetic force, she landed on his left thigh. Missed me? He whispered in her ears, causing her cheeks to redden in embarrassment. MHM. Still, she replied with a feeble nod while fidgeting in her dress. The red of her cheeks grew brighter. The scene snatched speech abilities from Ulrich's throat. See? And if I may add, none of your consorts were spared. Veins beat on Ulrich's temple. None? None, Conrad earnestly repeated, then set his consorts aside to rise from the chariot and fly toward Ulrich. Therefore, I'm here to give you my thanks. Ulrich von Jürgen, my beloved father, I screwed your daughter, consorts, wife, and soon, even your mother will be dancing on my rod. Meanwhile, all your vassals and the entirety of your country have fallen into my hands. The world has never seen a greater cuckold than you, Conrad proclaimed, then bowed toward Ulrich with clasped hands. On his right ring finger, Ulrich clearly saw the love token and holy artifact he'd granted Verena. Pooh. Unable to shoulder the blow, Ulrich spurted blood and passed out. His body tumbled onto the ground. Chapter 266 Ulrich's Bills. What was shame, what was loss? As Ulrich's unconscious body tumbled onto the ground, deep within the recesses of his mind, a voice wondered why those words applied so well to him. It was almost as if on this night, he redefined them all. You lost, the voice stated, then faded in the darkness of his mind, and in a resounding thud, Ulrich's body landed. Hey, adoptive father, why are you dozing off? The game is barely getting started. Conrad chortled, then waved his hand. Lifted by his irresistible telekinetic powers, Ulrich flew back into the air, hovering before Conrad. And with a resounding slap, Conrad shoved consciousness back into his body. You. Me. What about me? Sorry, but today is not about me. Conrad cut, and while keeping Ulrich trapped within the air, flew back to his chariot. Nils, come here. Conrad beckoned, and Nils obeyed, rising from her seat to stand by his side. Today is your day, your opportunity to avenge all slights. One against one, father against daughter. Fight and defeat Ulrich. His life will be yours to do with as you see fit, Conrad declared, then pressed his index on Nils' forehead. In a red light surge, the Valkyrie mark appeared and vanished within her forehead. Instantaneously, Nils felt her body refined, strength, speed, and resilience all rising to brand new heights. Although her cultivation remained at the transcendent rank, she could effortlessly rip a rising saint to shreds. At the same time, her soul worm was wiped out. However, so what? Ulrich was a peak stage fate wrestling saint with a battle power rivaling those two ranks above him. None on the scene doubted that she was not his match. But then, the ability Valkyrie Surge appeared within her mind. Understanding Conrad's ploy, Yvonne activated the Valkyrie mark she'd received from Conrad on the way here. And shockingly, her presence appeared within Nils' mind in the form of a red flame. Following her instincts, Nils activated the ability. Valkyrie Surge. Bright red flame erupted from her body, channeling the might of Yvonne's cultivation and adding it to hers. Now, although outwardly her cultivation remained at the same level, it completely eclipsed Ulrich's. His eyes widened in disbelief. What was this? A glaring attempt to devastate him through shame. That's what it was. Veins beat on his temple, and though the situation looked grim, he could not restrain a feral outburst. Can a man possibly be this wicked? Not content of robbing us of all we have, you now want to add insult to injury by having us battle our youngest? Even if you plan to slay us, does it need to be in such a callous manner? Recalling all we did for you, don't you feel the least bit ashamed? He roared, hoping to appeal to a sliver of Conrad's humanity. However, nope, not the tiniest bit. Conrad leisurely replied while sitting between his beloved consorts. Adoptive father, do not misunderstand. I'm not a righteous person, and this is not your due retribution. In fact, on the scale of immorality, I don't dare claim myself much better than you. Conrad stated while wrapping two arms around Yvonne and Else and patting the silent Verena with a third. However, you made the mistake of harming my beloved. My people, no one can harm. My women no one can touch. Whoever infringes on those rules must pay a corresponding price. And since you dared, suffering a tragic fate is only natural. I believe it doesn't get any more tragic. On the scene, Conrad and Nils aside, no one bothered to spare Ulrich a glance. Yvonne, Else, and Verena all acted as if he didn't exist. The naked display of disinterest further harmed his crumbling dignity, and he couldn't help but wonder when things went so wrong. This was supposed to be his era. He was supposed to trample all and become supreme. Invincibility, authority, all were meant to be his. Why then was he finding himself in such an abysm? Conrad, that unfilial traitor of a son. It was him. It was all his fault. But Ulrich wasn't given time to throw blame because Nils stepped forward. The red flames swirling around her form rose in size and intensity while deep resolve shone within her eyes. As the one standing before her, Ulrich could feel her soaring desire to beat him into a bloody pulp, as if the more she looked at him, the greater that need became. Nils, don't let yourself get confused by this predator. You can't possibly think of harming your FA dash. Ulrich began, but before he could finish his words, in a burst of red flames, Nils shot toward him and hurled her clenched fist straight at his jaw. Before he could react, the hook smashed into the left side of his jaw, and he spiraled into the air with a blood spurt. So, you remember that you're my father? She asked, her voice trembling with rage, and not waiting for an answer, turned into a red beam to pursue Ulrich's spiraling form. By the time he recovered his stance, an uppercut awaited him. Again, he flew, this time soaring in the sky. I thought you'd forgotten. I thought you no longer recalled that we are your family. But since you didn't, there is no need to hold back. Turning into 4 afterimages, she surrounded him from all sides and began a round of brutal hammering. In a flash, Ulrich turned into a volleyball, with the 4 Nils smashing him toward one another. T2 fast. Nils' explosive speed made him completely unable to evade while her strength left him no way to fight back. Each blow broke through his guard like a knife through butter, and in less than 3 seconds, he was utterly at her mercy. If this situation carried on, he would soon turn into a broken rag doll. Enough. Ulrich roared and summoned his divine shield. Bang! Nils' next punch crashed on the divine shield. Its divine power erupted, and she flew backward, unable to leave a dent. With a somersault, she recovered her balance and, undisturbed, flew back toward Ulrich. With the divine shield protecting him, all her offensives were neutralized. But at the same time, his life force dwindled at a rapid pace. With his cultivation level, using a divine artifact was far too costly, and he would die long before Nils could exhaust herself. Hence, he could only force a quick conclusion and capture her to secure an escape. Nils, you can't blame us for being merciless. This hurts us more than it hurts you. Ulrich thought while burning a large portion of his life force to trigger the shield's offensive move. The shield's light dimmed, and it sank toward the ground. Thinking that he could no longer endure its consumption and not willing to give him a recovery chance, Nils vanished and reappeared before Ulrich. His lips curled into a smile, and the shield vanished to reappear at her back. Got you. However, for the imperceptible split of a second, Ulrich's move stopped. Nils' right fist tore through his lower abdomen, releasing a dreadful force that shattered his energy center and meridians, while her left palm slammed the middle of his forehead and destroyed his spiritual sea. Ulrich's eyelids trembled, and as he felt the cultivation of a lifetime dispersing, his shuddering eyes again locked on Conrad, whose lips curved into a fiendish grin. Des Pieceable. Pooh. Blood gushed from his mouth and lower abdomen, and as the last bit of his cultivation vanished, Ulrich recalled that this conclusion was strikingly similar to his battle with Adelar. Chapter 267 End of the von Jürgen Dynasty. Again, Ulrich's consciousness faded, but before it could, despair filled his mind and awoke him. The realization that his lifetime's cultivation had just collapsed devastated him. All the ploys and schemes, the sacrifice of his most beloved child, the refinement of 1,000 infant souls, all he endured, the prices he paid, were rendered worthless in merely 2 blows. Lost. All lost, never to return. Gerg. Ulrich howled, his body and soul sinking in horrendous pain while warm tears trickled down his eyes. This was worse than death. Bearing witness to his soaring despair, Nils was undisturbed. If only you could treasure us the way you treasure power, perhaps it wouldn't have come to this, she whispered while pulling her fist from his guts. Now mortal, Ulrich couldn't endure such a terrible wound, and before he could drop onto the ground, Nils held him by the collar and shoved a restorative pill down his throat. However, you can't die. I want you to live. To spend the rest of your miserable life a helpless mortal without any means to change your fate. Forced to accept the reality of your permanent inferiority. Henceforth, you can only bow and scrape, submitting to the whim of the mighty. Moreover, without warning, Nils kicked Ulrich's crotch, shattering his balls, before shoving another restorative pill down his throat. Her hand muffled his squeals, not giving him the right to scream. A man like you shouldn't have the right to sire children. It is unfair to all the potentially good fathers deprived of the ability. Being a eunuch suits you best. Nils spat with tears trickling from her eyes and rancor lacing her voice. Shattered dreams, destroyed cultivation, castration, the succession of blows was too hard to bear. So hard that Ulrich started believing that this was nothing more than a nightmare. Ha ha ha, a nightmare. It must be a nightmare. Ha ha ha. Ulrich burst into maddened laughter, expecting the scenery to return to the days when he occupied his mighty throne, ruling the holy continent's #1 country. Alas, the staggering pain filling him testified to the reality of his circumstances. Shaking his head, Conrad stood up and appeared before Ulrich. Reality is sometimes hard to accept, and for those of us that pursue the summit, your end is indeed worse than death. From now on, you can serve as one of my mortal court eunuchs. I'm curious to see how many decades you can endure. Conrad began while extending his hand toward Ulrich's forehead. A strand of silver light flew from it to hover within his left palm. Then, a blood-light orb emerged from Ulrich's chest and stopped beside the silver light strand. No, no, I'm not willing. Ulrich howled, but to no avail. Conrad pressed his right index on Ulrich's forehead and rewired him. With the evolution of his abilities, rewiring the mortal Ulrich was simplicity incarnate. Rebellion left Ulrich's mind, and he surrendered to his fate. Thus ended the last von Jürgen emperor. With his fall, after 100,000 years of reign, the von Jürgen dynasty collapsed, and the Holy Flame Empire would soon follow it into oblivion to make way for the New World Order. Conrad sealed the silver light strand in his soul gourd and locked the blood orb in a space treasure, then alongside his ladies, descended upon the imperial palace. They met no resistance and were welcomed with open arms. Led by Ankh and the 10th von Jürgen Elder, The imperial consorts and remaining imperial kin knelt to welcome their new master. The von Jürgen dynasty has reached the end of its destiny. As the highest-ranked, surviving member of this house, and with the consent of all imperial kin, I, Ankh von Jürgen, beseech you to take the throne and offer you our allegiance. Knowing that absolute surrender was their only path to survival, the von Jürgen imperial kinsmen didn't dare hesitate and kowtowed before Conrad. The von Jürgen dynasty has reached the end of its destiny, and the country requires a new regime. You, Lord, are mighty and able to suppress all under the heavens. Only you can bring back prosperity and restore the peace. Please accept the throne and establish a new dynasty. They exclaimed in tandem, desperately hoping their lives would be spared. Seeing this, Conrad nodded. Having been adopted into the imperial family, I cannot stand and watch the inheritance of 100,000 years collapse in such a wanton manner. Though the country changes surnames, you shall still have a place. Elmar von Jürgen will be sealed as Grand Duke, and new househead to carry on the von Jürgen legacy, and a new mansion will be built for you all. He said toward the kowtowing imperial kinsmen, and as soon as his words echoed, they felt free of the invisible weight crushing their shoulders. Alive. They would escape this tribulation alive. At this juncture, they asked for nothing more. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your grace. Your Majesty is benevolent, treasures the common people, and is incomparably brilliant. Your reign shall stretch across eternity. They flattered, and unwilling to spend more time on them, Conrad dismissed them all. Then, escorted by his consorts, he walked into the throne room and stopped before its stairs. His eyes locked upon the throne, and he recalled the first time he stood beside it. Unlike that time, there weren't any rows of officials. Ulrich no longer occupied it, and none could dare show him contempt. Now, it was his, and as soon as he sat upon it, the first step of his grand aspiration would reach completion. But as he stared at the throne with a faint smile, Elsa's voice echoed. When shall we hold the coronation ceremony? No hurry. We first need to wait for the Celestial Church and Infernal Cult to dispatch their troops. In 3 days, we shall publicly execute Erhard, Bayeyes, and the third cult elder's son. At that time, I will meet their armies in battle and slaughter them all. Afterward, we can hold the coronation ceremony. Conrad explained. And what about the new dynasty and country's names? Or you can always let the von Jürgen name survive through you. It's not like it would be improper. Yvonne jested, and hearing this, Conrad's smile brightened. Not a bad idea. A pity that I don't have an official surname. Conrad replied in kind. In the Holy Continent, commoners and slaves didn't have a right to surnames. Therefore, the original Conrad didn't bear one. Meanwhile, in his past life, he was an orphan and bore a name assigned by the orphanage. As for Serker or the House of Tauroth, he naturally didn't feel any sense of belonging to them. And don't forget that you also have to choose a name for your new race. Your status screen is currently cluttered by X's. Celine's voice echoed. Gods don't need family names. I am a primogen, the first of my blood, and will soon become the faith. Let's use the higher realms naming conventions and make it the House of Conrad. And considering my current true form, there are not many viable race names. Let's go with World Devourer. As for the country's name, that's simpler. Since Jade is the new symbol of my blood, let it be the Jade Dynasty, and I shall be the Jade Emperor. You really know no shame? Celine directly replied. Jade was a symbol of purity and perfection. How was Conrad qualified to stand beside those words? If anything, he should be the depraved emperor. Chapter 268 Morning is your rye. Afterward, they left the throne room and dived into various tasks. Els started restructuring both the Imperial Palace and the church while Yvonne solidified her cultivation breakthrough. In the meantime, Conrad sat within his new chambers with Verena on his lap. Now that only the two of us remain, there is no need to restrain yourself. Morning is your right. he whispered while stroking her silver hairs. Though in public, she always maintained stately elegance, Verena was by no means aloof and deeply cared for kinship. The loss of her father was no trivial blow, and Conrad could see that the depth of her silence mirrored the profundity of her grief. Sovereign Prince Thorwald Kvass was a terrible father and an even worse husband. In his life, he only loved one woman, his elder sister, the Dowager, Amalia. A pity that in her eyes, only the previous emperor mattered. He could only suppress his feelings and live in frustration, until that day when in a drunken stupor, he held onto her waist and professed his love. While mortal brewed alcohol had no effect on cultivators above the true rank, many brands of cultivation beverages helpful in breakthroughs and enhancing cultivation speed existed. Therefore, drunkenness wasn't uncommon among affluent cultivators. Conrad and Yvonne's drinking sessions were a perfect example of that. My mother and I stumbled on the scene, a scene that plagued the remainder of her life. Although father treated her with respect and gave her due honor as his princess consort, she could never forget that sight and soon fell into depression. A depression that ultimately took her life. A saint dying of heartache, a joke? Really? Verena reminisced in an emotionless tone. Most well-informed individuals knew of Thorwald's profound affection and absolute loyalty toward his sister. However, in their eyes, it was nothing more than a little brother's devotion. Never did they expect that it already stepped into that territory. But I couldn't resent him. If anything, I resented my mother for being so weak, to let her affection for a man rule and ruin her life. For that reason, I resolved to never be ruled by emotions. A cultivator's life is far too long to wallow in such a quagmire. But emotions make individuals. Without emotions, there is no existence. Only the slow passing of identical days. Conrad declared while still stroking Verena's hairs. Indeed, afterward, the church's decree to marry me to Ulrich came, and seeing in there an opportunity to both consolidate his house's power and bring himself closer toward his sister, my father didn't hesitate. Again, I didn't resent him, because having enjoyed the glory, splendor, and wealth due to a Kvass princess, I knew it was my duty to pay back what I owed through that marriage. One cannot be too greedy. At the same time, I believed it was a good opportunity to leave my father's sight. Never did I expect that his demise would be so hard to digest. As Verena's words ended, her eyes moistened. In the end, he raised you from the cradle, taught you cultivation across decades, granted you the best resources at his disposal, and helped you lay down your foundation. Though he may have done this as an investment for his house's prosperity, he still did. You say he was a terrible father, but I only see a man that couldn't have it all, and therefore, set his priorities. Your grief is the proof that you're no ingrate, and that on the road of cultivation, you didn't lose that little bit of humanity. And sometimes, that little bit is the reason why we're worth loving. Could you stare at his fall with an impassible look, without an ounce of pain or regret? I could value you, but I couldn't treasure you. Hearing this, Verena closed her eyes, and from them, 2 watery lines trickled onto the ground. Her tears then flowed. For a brief instant, Conrad considered using the heart-mending kiss to directly erase all grief from Verena's heart. But as soon as the thought crossed his mind, it vanished. After spending several hours in Verena's company, Conrad stood up and headed into Elsa's chambers. There, she sat on a tall throne-like red chair, holding a red candy lollipop in her right hand, while the left rested on the chair's arm. I didn't know you had such a hobby, Conrad stated while Else brought the lollipop to her lips. The two's colors matched perfectly, and while having a taste of the candy, Else shifted her eyes toward Conrad. It's a special brand with rare properties. Try it. Afterward, she pulled the lollipop out of her mouth and tossed it toward Conrad. Catching it between his right index and middle finger, Conrad brought it to his lips and sampled it. The candy's taste meshed with Elsa's saliva to sneak into his throat. As it did, he felt a mild, relaxing sensation spread within his mind and body, while his cultivation experienced a nigh imperceptible growth. Clearly, this candy was an alchemical product able to soothe the being while increasing cultivation. Perhaps it even influenced cultivation speed. However, due to his supreme Tao and saint-level cultivation base, Conrad could barely feel any effect. On others, the results might be different. Impressive, he appraised while stepping toward Else. My mother was a profound alchemy master who enjoyed inventing and refining all kinds of odd things. This was one of her creations. Else explained while Conrad brought his face closer to hers and pulled out the lollipop to press it against her lips. In silence, she took it in, and Conrad then pulled her by the waist, snatching her seat and having her rest on his lap instead. Straddling him, she wrapped her left arm around his neck while her right hand still held the candy. Their faces grew increasingly closer, but before their lips connected, Else set the candy in between, having them kiss the opposite sides instead. Naughty, Conrad commented. Coming from you, that's undoubtedly a praise, she replied, before setting the candy aside and wrapping both arms around Conrad's neck to pull him into a languid kissing session. Simultaneously, he ground his thigh against her fold. Conrad was pleased to see that no underwear lied in his way, and the Metz's juices freely dropped on his thigh. Their arousal peaked, and the kissing session grew more heated. Else untied Conrad's belt, worming her hand into his pants to free his cock before setting it against her flower bud. Oh! Without hesitation, she impaled herself on his rod, riding him hard and fast, and only stopping to relish in the blissful sensation of her own orgasms while clenching on his hairs. Soon, the unrestrained sound of her moans slammed against the walls and stretched toward the outside. And feeling Conrad's face pressed against her chest, Else slammed her but even faster on his shaft, as if possessed by the desperate need to keep him trapped on and within her. Ah! While she rammed herself on his meat rod, Conrad removed her mini dress and carried her onto the bed for 2 hours of sexual passion and dual cultivation. Holding the now naked Else in his arms, Conrad rested his head against hers and kissed her cheek. Then, he stood up, walking toward his final destination for this long night. Chapter 269 Joining Hands Before a Common Foe. Within her chambers, Yvonne sat cross-legged, solidifying her drastic cultivation boost with her eyes shut close. But as soon as Conrad stepped in, her eyes opened and locked onto him. Seeing him, her lips curled into a smile, and she stood up. Then, without warning, she flew at him with a punch. Undisturbed, Conrad blocked it with his left forearm, the smile he wore unchanged. In a flash, she assailed him with hundreds of blows which he blocked without effort. Yvonne then raised her knee, slamming it toward Conrad's abdomen, but he stopped it within his right palm, then knocked off her fist to grab her by the waist, while holding her thigh within his right hand. Astounding reflexes, astounding speed, astounding flesh. I didn't expect I'd fall so far behind. Yvonne appraised with a contented smile. What can I say? When even destiny is on your side, rapid progress is a must. From now on, you'll have to work extra hard. Conrad replied without letting go of her. Conceited, but it's fine. Who said destiny wasn't tameable? I won't let you get too full of yourself. Yvonne pledged while cupping Conrad's cheeks in her hands. Without further delay, he lifted her in the air, letting her wrap her legs around his waist while he took her lips, and their tongues intertwined in an ardent kiss. As he brought her to bed, his hands trailed her back, and by the time they reached it, he'd already lowered the straps to rain passion on her neck and chest. They spent the rest of the night in relentless romping sessions, letting primal desires drive them and make up for the lost time. In that night, words had no place. Only endless moans, grunts, and the sound of flesh meeting flesh in tantalizing mating echoed. Meanwhile, the two great factions were swept by tumultuous waves. For the first time since the death of their founders, the first time in 1,000,000 years, the celestial church and infernal cult leaders met for discussion. The cult and church leaders occupied the primary seats, while the elders stood a step below. All were matched in ranks, and their faces full of gravity. Even the cult leader, the blood fiend Draven Toril, couldn't hide the concerns shining on his face. The church leader, the sun spirit Anatole Worth, was no better. In fact, inwardly, he was 1,000 times worse. With his maimed son trapped in the Holy Continent, a continent sages no longer had access to, how could he not be full of worries? Moreover, although he tried to convince himself of otherwise, that lunatic of a profane prince's mortal avatar didn't seem like the type to speak rubbish. Perhaps he never planned to execute the captives, but since he dared say he would flay them daily, he probably would. There was no time to waste. With the last holy war nearing, Anatole didn't care about who held the prime disciple position. However, never could he allow his flesh and blood to suffer mishap. Saving Earhart was his top priority, and for the sake of that cause, he didn't mind forming a temporary truce with the infernal cult. Anatole, you and I are the enemies of a lifetime. I believe there are words we needn't speak. The two of us know exactly why we're here. Draven began while keeping his eyes locked on Anatole. Indeed, Anatole nodded in approval before carrying on. The situation has spiraled out of control. That man managed the impossible feat of snatching the tower for himself and is now its master. Thanks to that, he managed to conjure an anti-divine power ward which prevents us from stepping into the Holy Continent. But in the process, he also revealed his depth. With that information now clear, we have nothing to fear. I propose we first dispatch emissaries to discuss terms. If he's willing to trade, we can leave it at that for some time. Anatole's words pulled an approving nod from the celestial elders. However, the infernal cult side didn't budge. What if he isn't? Draven immediately asked, the words causing a frown to flash on Anatole's face. Then, we can only use extreme measures. I advocate a joint assault of our strongest forces beneath the divine rank. A host so startling that its mere sight will force all the Holy Continent's denizens on their knees. We each dispatch 7,200 cross-tribulation saints, 450 star connecting saints, 270 star manifesting saints, and 90 star fusing saints led by 15 quasi-sages. Add to that 80,000 saints beneath cross-tribulation. Hearing this, all within the room were petrified. This was more than 90% of each faction's overall forces, legions that should only appear during the Holy War. Although he'd anticipated such a strong reaction, even Draven was forced to admit that the words rang his eardrums. On the infernal cult side, only the third cult elder wholeheartedly agreed with this stance, and even found it pleasing to the ears. I know you think we're overdoing it, but the enemy can't be underestimated. As we've seen, his ancestral glory is dreadful and can obliterate quasi-sages. In fact, the average early-stage divine seed expert would find it difficult to survive. Only by combining the strength of our armies in a battle formation can we crush that advantage and trample that man. Afterward, he will turn into lamb on the chopping block. Draven sighed but nodded. I agree, Draven began, but before he could finish his words, Birkin's voice echoed. This fight is a joke. You may be inclined to lower your faces for the sake of impudent juniors, but we Circers are unwilling to do so. Our forces will not participate. Birkin's words brought a weighty silence on the scene, and all eyes turned toward him and the Circer elders. Great Elder, this matter has already transcended the boundaries of faces. It's now a question of faith and dignity. I hope you can forget your pride to avoid undermining the war effort. Draven declared in a mild but commanding tone. We can dispatch the barbarian continent's secular forces to support the war effort. 60 million troops that will dive into the Holy Continent, while the main forces confront that youth. In this way, you can split his attention and increase your odds of success. That's the best I will offer. All barbarian cons were in one way or another related to and controlled by House Circer. Therefore, the barbarian continent's secular world was, for all intent and purposes, ruled by them. Night made place for dawn, and Conrad stood up, leaving the comfort of Yvonne's arms to dive into his next operation. First, as promised, he ordered the 3 captives paraded naked in the streets, then slowly flayed across the next 3 days. Meanwhile, he summoned one of his god hearts, and using it as anchor alongside the powers of his divine Stolas physique, connected himself to the plague and took control of it. The plague was 2 days from starting, and according to Gulistan, after 7 days of germination, demons aside, it would kill all non-believers beneath the transcendent rank within the Holy Continent. However, instead of reversing it, Conrad changed its properties, then directly triggered it. On that day, in various corners of the Holy Continent, thousands of commoners and cultivators alike would see dozens of pustules grow on their bodies, carrying with them crippling diseases and horrendous pain. The people were startled, even more when they realized that simple contact with the afflicted was enough to immediately contract the disease. Chaos soared, and the plague thus began, fulfilling the prophecy of the Profane prince's envoys. Chapter 270 Negotiation or Humiliation. You were warned but didn't believe, given an opportunity, but you didn't cherish it. Now His Highness rage erupts and shall sweep the Holy Continent with a grand purging tide. The Profane prince's envoys proclaimed throughout all the corners of the Holy Continent, and soon, many of the local governments would support them in spreading their words. Of the 5 nations, it is in the Holy Flame Empire that they spread at the fastest pace. The dukes, marquis, and all other landed nobles supported them in their endeavors, dispatching teams to assist them and luring the commoners into listening through all means imaginable. 10,000 deaths on the first day, not more, not less. 100,000 on the second. 1 million on the third. 10 million on the fourth. 100 million on the fifth. 1 billion on the sixth. 10 billion on the seventh. This is how the righteous plague will harvest lives. And if by the 7th day you still fail to repent and embrace the one true road, then His Highness shall wipe out all the 50 billion individuals of the Holy Continent. The envoys proclaimed, "Make no mistake, our God is wrathful but loving. Blessings unending await the enlightened that accept His embrace. If they choose Him, even the afflicted shall be freed of all woes." At first, such words were not taken seriously by the commoners. After all, 100,000 years of established faith stood between them. However, as the first day of the plague ended, and word spread that exactly 10,000 individuals met their deaths, Conrad's cult received a substantial influx of followers. Meanwhile, 2 envoys stood within the imperial palace's throne room, one from the celestial church, the other from the infernal cult. Conrad sat on the throne, with Kron at his right and Wolfgang at his left. Hum. As you have seen upon arrival, the 3 felons are currently being submitted to punishment. Wolfgang began with his arms crossed beneath his back, seeing that a trivial 7th-step semi-saint was discussing with them as if they were equals. The 2 envoys struggled to restrain their ire. And when they recalled the scene of the captives being flayed in the city square for all to see, they almost exploded. However, with the situation being what it was, they could only restrain themselves. His Highness is true to his words. In 3 days, they will be executed. Your presence here holds no meaning. Hearing this, the 2's eyes violently distorted, and they were forced to take in a deep breath to restrain themselves. Your Profane Highness, our 2 factions are willing to pay bail for the captives. Please state your price. As long as it's within reason, we shall abide. They declared and bowed toward Conrad. If at first, not many believed Conrad would push the vice too far, when those 2 laid eyes upon Erhard, Bayeyes, and the 3rd cult elder's son, they no longer doubted that Conrad aimed for their lives. To say nothing of 3 days. It would be a miracle if they could survive too. Hearing this, Wolfgang shook his head. This is not merely a matter money can solve. Of those 3, only the 3rd cult elder's son is redeemable through bail. The other 2 coveted his Profane Highness women. What a cardinal sin. In this world, who can tolerate them? As Wolfgang's voice echoed, Kron nodded in firm approval, thinking that he and this father-in-law spoke the same language. However, Those words only intensified the suppressed ire of the two envoys. Everything has a price. It's just a matter of negotiation. Between men of reason, there is no need for such an uncompromising stand dash. The celestial envoy began. But before he could finish his words, Wolfgang stretched out his hand. Don't be mistaken. Here there are only two parties, God and the offenders. God doesn't need to be reasonable toward offenders. It is by his goodwill that you are given a chance to speak. Do not misuse it. Wolfgang cut, causing the two's nostrils to expand in loud inhalations. As you say. But, again, they tried to put in a few words. Alas, Wolfgang didn't allow them. Moreover, it is God's dignity that is at stake. Can God's dignity have a price? Preposterous. Please mind your words. Otherwise, this discussion comes to an end. Once more, Kron gave a vigorous nod. The more he spoke, the more pleasing to the eyes that father-in-law turned out to be. A pity that before today, they didn't have a proper chance to interact. Even Conrad was forced to admit that Wolfgang deserved more rewards. The two envoys were ready to spout curses. How was this a discussion? From beginning to end, Wolfgang was just cutting them mid-talk. However, our God is merciful, and there is room for maneuver. The three can be returned if you fulfill several conditions. Before the meeting, Conrad had already given Wolfgang a clear set of instructions, and he was now about to follow them. 500 million holy crystals, 500,000 divine crystals. All women above the holy rank and below the divine blood rank offered as concubines. Hearing those three conditions, the two could no longer restrain themselves. You're going too far, and roared in tandem. 500 million holy crystals? 500,000 divine crystals? Did you first ask our coffers if we had this amount? What is this? Robbery of the underpants? As for the third condition, you even have the gals to propose such a thing? Are you by any chance asking our leaders and elders to send you their wives and daughters for you to plow? Is this a negotiation or a humiliation? They asked in indignation. But never in their wildest dreams did they expect Wolfgang's next words to be, "Yes, that's exactly what we're asking. Don't be mistaken. It's their glory to have their wives and daughters serve His Highness." The words struck the two speechless, and for an instant, they wondered if Wolfgang hadn't gone mad. If not for madness, how could such words possibly escape his lips? However, facing the seriousness of his tone, they were forced to realize that this was no joke. Those are our terms, the non-negotiable terms that will ensure your people's survival. Do with them as you see fit. In the meantime, we shall continue the public flaying. Wolfgang pursued. You're mad, utterly mad. There is no way our leaders will ever agree to this nonsense. Terms? Joke. This is clearly a dash. The infernal envoy began. But before he could finish his words, guards, execute him. Kron ordered. And instantaneously, two hulky men appeared. They were level 8 restoration beasts in human form and now served in the Imperial Guard. The first one grabbed the infernal envoy by the back of his neck and skull, then slammed his face into the ground, keeping him pinned while the second one raised his war hammer for the execution blow. MHHH, MHHH, MHHH. The infernal envoy's muffled screams echoed. The celestial envoy was baffled and turned a startled gaze toward Kron. What do you mean by this? He's an envoy? Envoy or not, for spouting profanities before his profane highness, the sentence is death. The Restoration Beast Guards didn't need to hear more. The executioner's hammer dropped and smashed the infernal envoy's head into blood, brain, and bone debris. As a cross-tribulation saint, he just couldn't resist. The celestial envoy felt weak at the knee and dropped on his butt. Those are our terms. If you have any complaints, feel free to follow your fellow into the grave. Wolfgang and Kron said in tandem, their words awakening the celestial envoy to the reality of his situation. After a hurried bow, he shot out of the imperial palace, rushing toward the council's meeting place. Chapter 271 to Arms. Not bad, father-in-law. For such a presentation and your continual work till now, you deserve abundant rewards. Conrad declared after the celestial envoy's departure. Boss, this is merely my duty. But if you must reward, I naturally won't be perfunctory. Wolfgang replied with a bright smile. Hearing this, Conrad nodded and extended his hand toward Wolfgang. Bright jade light erupted from his palm and dived into Wolfgang's chest. In the few months since we parted, your cultivation climbed 4 steps, reaching the 7th step of the semi-holy knight rank. Although on the ancient crystal world standards, such progress is astonishing, it is far from enough. First, I will help you complete an atavism to elevate your bloodline to the demon rank. Conrad began, and as he spoke, a jade-colored shroud surrounded Wolfgang. His nature serpent bloodline properties changed, and the impurities vanished as it retraced the ancestral force hidden within his lineage. From a nature serpent, Wolfgang climbed the bloodline hierarchy to become a pure-blooded hydra. Thus, although his cultivation didn't improve in the slightest, his battle power soared, and with it, so did his talent. Overjoyed, Wolfgang was about to drop on his knees when Conrad waved his hand, causing 9 drops of divine ascension demon blood to appear and fly toward him. Without hesitation, he swallowed the blood drops and sat cross-legged to stabilize them within his body. Tremendous demonic and divine powers erupted from within Wolfgang's body and spread throughout his veins. But knowing the refinement of such blood would take some time, he didn't dive into it, first suppressing it within his veins to avoid an impromptu breakthrough. Afterward, Wolfgang dropped on his knees. Boss, thank you. Again, Conrad nodded, then motioned for Wolfgang to stand up. But from now on, I suppose calling you boss is no longer appropriate. Wolfgang jested. Indeed. However, our mobster team has come a long way. In private, just call me boss. Will do. After this exchange, Kron brought them back onto serious matter. Master, what is the next step? There are only 2 possibilities. First, they attempt a rescue mission before dispatching troops. Second, they don't, and directly surround us with their strongest forces. Conrad replied while resting his chin on his entwined fingers. Hearing this, Wolfgang frowned. How could they dare attack without first attempting a rescue mission? Doing so is no different than disregarding the captives' lives. Though the words were sensible, Conrad shook his head. It's a matter of success potential. A small rescue team of highly skilled quasi-sages is their best option. However, it cannot escape my eyesight. They should know that while we're displaying the captives in the city square, we're keeping them under close watch and are baiting them into such a vain rescue attempt. Saving and killing are 2 different things. To say nothing of the battle's results, I can kill them 3 as soon as I sense the intruder's presence. Such a move is unlikely. Conrad explained. On the contrary, when the true battle begins, those 3 become my shields and last bargaining chips. Therefore, a large-scale clash with the odds clearly stacked against me is the best protection they can offer their people. For that reason, I'm inclined to lean on the second option. In a flash, Conrad's words clarified Wolfgang's doubts, and Kron's lips curled into a fiendish smile. The fools don't understand who they're dealing with. The more come, the more die. If Master goes all out, in the mortal realm, beneath the divine rank, all are ants. Kron proclaimed, and his words were no exaggeration. As Conrad's familiar, he understood his current abilities better than anyone else. If his ancestral glory was a formidable ability boasting various defensive and offensive perks, his lineage weapon was an unparalleled destructive force that trumped his ancestral glory and might. As for his true form, its mere appearance would fill the world with dread. Meanwhile, the plague spread, bringing alongside it more desperate folk seeking shelter in the only force able to bring salvation, the Profane Prince's cult. In the infernal cult and celestial church's gathering place, listening to the celestial envoy's report, both Draven and Anatole silently suppressed their rage. Never in their wildest dreams did they expect that Conrad would truly go to such extents and give no consideration for face. Had he not vented enough spleen? Was he really willing to fight them to the end? But while they could still maintain their composure, others failed to do the same. How dare he? How dare he? That bullshit profane prince is bullying us intolerably. The third cult elder roared and slammed his palm on the table facing him. And on this occasion, all agreed with him. That so-called profane prince had pushed the vice too far and humiliated them beyond all reason. He even dared request the delivery of all their women, the gals. As the leaders of the world, when did they ever face such an insult? If they didn't butcher him, how could they vent their hatred? Now, even those not directly connected to the matter couldn't help but picture the scene of Conrad being shredded into 10,000 pieces. Witnessing this scene, Gulistan sighed. The war was inevitable, and so was the result. Those old fogies were merely walking into a glaring trap while thinking the situation entirely under control. However, for House Circer, this was an opportunity. An opportunity both she and her father planned to seize. If Conrad's performance was up to expectations, perhaps they could push their plans ahead of time and make the Circer the new rulers of the infernal cult. Humph. After experiencing some fortuitous encounters in the tower, that country bumpkin now thinks himself unparalleled under the heavens. Good, very good. Let's remind him, and all those secular world ants, why for 1,000,000 years we have ruled this world. A celestial elder exclaimed. After the tower's appearance, many conjectured that Conrad's inexplicable nature came from a secret within the higher floors, a secret left by the founders. That being the case, capturing him to extract that bloodline became of vital importance. However, with the level of indignation and hatred they currently felt, if capturing proved too challenging, killing was absolutely fine. To arms. Our elite forces will meet on the battlefield and conduct a joint aerial assault on the Holy Continent. Meanwhile, the barbarian continent's 60 million troops will swarm the land and lay the Holy Continent to waste. The cream of the crop beneath the divine rank backed by the strongest formation and puppets. Let us see how this so-called God's avatar faces this tribulation. The infernal cult leader, Draven Toril, declared, his words pulling approving nods from all those gathered. Chapter 272 Catastrophe. The gathering of a holy army didn't require much time. In less than 1 hour, an army of more than 100,000 assembled in the sky, facing the anti-divine power screen that now separated holy and barbarian continents. 14,000 cross-tribulation saints, 900 star connecting saints, 540 star manifesting saints, and 180 star fusing saints filled the sky. 30 quasi-sages led them, while 160,000 lower-ranked saints stood at their backs. A never-before-seen armada whose aura awed the ancient crystal world. Before such legions, all shivered. All, except Conrad and his faction members. In fact, as the army formed, Conrad's lips curled into a bright smile and delight clearly shone on his face. Then, the earth quaked, littered by unending swarms of armored troops that assembled to follow the saints' clash. On this occasion, following House Circer's orders, the barbarian Khans lowered their personal banners and dressed their soldiers in the same black armor. However, as the cultivation of those soldiers greatly varied, it should have taken a tremendous amount of time for them to gather. But thanks to a skillful use of thousands of teleportation circles, the 60 million-man strong army assembled before the screen, occupying the ground while the leading saint bloated the sky. To the spiteful abomination named Conrad, your vile deeds stretch from one corner of the world to the other. This is an official declaration of war. On this day, the infernal cult and celestial church join hands to cleanse this world of your depraved self. Surrender now, and we can spare your folks. Persist in damnation, and we shall unleash a maelstrom of destruction upon the Holy Continent. The leading quasi-sages roared for the entire world to hear, and trapped between this clash of titans, the commoners wailed, not knowing where to seek shelter. Conrad stood on his throne with Yvonne at his right and Else at his left. What an amusing declaration. he appraised while standing from his throne. "How many do you think can survive?" Yvonne asked with a similar smile. "None whatsoever," Conrad replied. "Not even the women?" Else pursued, her words making Conrad chortle. "This is not about lust. Swords and spears have no eyes, and since they choose to stand against me, I cannot exhaust myself to spare them," said Conrad before stepping into the air. Vanishing from the throne room, he crossed tens of thousands of miles to reappear in the sky before his foes. And though hundreds of miles stood between them, with their cultivation levels, they could effortlessly see one another. "Vile deeds? You flatter me. However, you misunderstand. This is indeed a purge of the filth that dares stand in my supreme way," Conrad declared before stretching out his arms, his words causing the leading quasi-sages to wonder if he'd gone mad from fright. "Come at me if you dare, but know that once you barge into my realm, there is no way out," he warned, his smile undisturbed. The words caused the Saint Legions to sneer. "Activate the battle formations and summon the puppets. On this day, we remind the ants why the sheep must obey the shepherd." The designed commander among the quasi-sages bellowed and alongside his peers, waved his hands. Hundreds of thousands of holy crystals appeared in the sky, forming elemental pentagrams around the experts. First, the pentagrams linked them all in a battle formation, causing their individual and overall battle power to skyrocket. Then, they further empowered them with elemental force. Those beneath the cross-tribulation saints bathed in fire. Cross-tribulation saints in fire and water. Star-connecting saints in fire, water, and earth. Star-manifesting saints also had wind, while the star-fusing saints and quasi-sages had a bonus of space force. And if that wasn't enough, they summoned a battalion of holy puppets. Meanwhile, the 60 million barbarian troops below followed in their footsteps and crossed the screen to invade the Holy Flame Empire's northern border. For indeed, it was at the Holy Flame Empire's northern border that this battle occurred. Seeing Conrad called "son of a bitch," Gulistan sighed. Why does it have to be an insult? He should bear the name with pride. She monologued while keeping her eyes locked on the assault. As the troops crossed the screen, Gulistan's lips curled into a smile. "Come on, boy. Show me what else you got." As soon as the troops dived past the screen, Conrad turned heels and ran, the move startling the assailing troops. After all this bragging, he just turns heels? No, it must be a trap, the quasi-sage commander assessed. However, before he could submit the hypothesis to his subordinates, Conrad changed his trajectory and, in a flash, made dozens of circles around the invading army. Hundreds of thousands of holy crystals remained in his wake, and by the time Conrad returned to the front, all intertwined in an intricate formation. He's a formation master, they realized too late. But when Conrad joined his hands, and they felt the vast warding force erupting from the crystals, they realized it was nothing more than a sealing formation. "Do you think we need to escape before you?" They snorted, then surrounded Conrad from all sides, paying no heed to the sealing formation. His smile remained unchanged. In tandem, the leading quasi-sages stretched out their hands, each releasing a dreadful elemental strike encompassing the power of the 5 elements. The horrendous waves of elemental power shredded space as they rushed toward Conrad. Meanwhile, at the back, more than 100,000 saints fired 6th circle spells of various intensity upon Conrad. Still, he didn't budge. Lambs don't know they should run before the wolf bares his fangs. Awaken and end all things beneath the heavens. Catastrophe! Conrad exclaimed and stretched out his right hand. Dazzling jade light erupted from his form, morphing into a massive jade greatsword whose pommel landed within his clutch. Wielding it, the intensity of Conrad's aura rose to shocking heights. His sword drew a perfect arc, releasing an overbearing force that spread throughout the atmosphere. From the sky, thunderstorms dropped. From the ground, thousands of enormous boulders rose. And in between, Jade-colored flames erupted to meet the legion of saints' assault. Thus, the battle began. Chapter 273 Power of Calamity. The cataclysmic eruption collided with the myriad of spells and elemental strikes released by the invading Saint army, releasing a dreadful explosion that sent violent tremors throughout the holy continent's ground. However, thanks to Conrad's sealing dome, the damage was kept to a minimum. Meanwhile, the sealing dome also prevented the 60 million earthly troops from advancing, trapping them where they stood. Now, they could only stare in awe at the shocking battle. With that first confrontation, the world was again startled. And feeling the cataclysmic energy rippling from that dreadful weapon, both Anatole and Draven were forced to admit they'd underestimated their foe. It seemed Conrad's methods were unending, and one ability hid beneath another. Worse, although they couldn't feel demonic energies or recognize the weapon, they were starting to get the impression that within Conrad's body hid the forces of demons, devas, and humans. These were terrible news. The higher realms rules were clear. Nephilims held the status of kill on sight, as those tasked with spreading the faith in the ancient crystal world. If it ever became known that they allowed the appearance and growth of a Nephilim, should they return to the higher realms, only adversity awaited them. He must die. Anatole and Draven agreed in a mental exchange, and from where they stood, sent multiple orders to the front. The quasi-sage army leaders all received the same order. Kill him at all cost. The words reverberated within their minds, not leaving room for mistakes. They all exchanged glances, and their determination soared. Their hands flashed in incantation gestures, and the formation binding all the saint experts grew more potent. Worse, the overlapping of their strength approached perfection, making their battle power rise to new heights. Now, their battle power rivaled that of a peak-stage divine seed expert. 9-star holy artifacts were summoned en masse, shooting toward Conrad, and releasing their strongest strikes while the puppets took the vanguard and charged like blind berserkers. But blind they were not, because, within the formation, thousands of saints were tasked with controlling and organizing them to surround Conrad in an ordered fashion, using tactics to maximize battle efficiency. Alas, such tricks simply couldn't deter him. Sword Calamity. Conrad held his sword vertically, the tip aiming at the ground far below while his hairs and clothes fluttered within the sky. His eyes glittered in jade light, and Catastrophe released tens of thousands of berserk green sword beams that effortlessly tore through the assailing puppets. They turned into metal scraps and tumbled onto the ground. Then shockingly, in a light twister, Catastrophe morphed into a jade bow. Arrow Calamity. Conrad exclaimed and pulled the bowstring. A jade light arrow appeared, and Conrad fired it toward the sky. At first, the troops wondered why he made such a move, but when the arrow reached the sky, it exploded, turning into hundreds of thousands of arrows that mercilessly rained onto the religious saint troops. Elemental Barriers. The quasi-sage commander bellowed, and instantaneously, the troops raised a formidable shield encompassing the 5 elemental forces. Bang, bang, bang. Like a thunderclap, the arrows barreled into the barrier, crackled it, but failed to break through. The space power within the barrier then absorbed the arrows to redirect them toward Conrad. At the same time, they released formidable spells on Conrad. Calamity Dispersion, Conrad uttered, and the arrows vanished. Then he once again pulled the bowstrings, firing a succession of arrow calamities upon his foes. Before his offensive, their spells collapsed, and new cracks appeared on the barrier they raised. Crack, crack, crack. The cracks multiplied, and openings spread across the barrier. Conrad's lips curled into a fiendish grin. Sound Calamity. The bow turned into a jade flute which Conrad brought to his lips. With a blow, the flute released a ringing sound that snuck through the barrier's cracks and echoed within the ears of all the holy troops. Damnable. Their leaders roared in tandem, but it was far too late. Chapter 274 World Devourer. With his body brimming with the influx of death essence, Conrad stepped forward. Catastrophe again morphed, returning to the greatsword shape. What's wrong? After all those bold declarations, is this all you got? Come on, show me your depth. The derisive tone and smile with which Conrad said those words rekindled the remaining experts' fury. Without hesitation, they burned their life force to the limit they could endure, their hairs graying in the process, then shot toward Conrad. Bang! A startling clash ensued. The more than 1,600 experts acted as one man, and with their battle power reaching the divine blood and spirit ranks, their abilities far transcended anything displayed beforehand. Alas, no matter how hard they fought, they couldn't take the advantage, and the battle gradually settled into a stalemate. Conrad assumed his ascended Titan form, and each hand now wielded a jade scimitar, giving him the appearance of an invincible war god. However, that wasn't enough. His opponents literally fought with their lives, betting their existence in every move. The stalemate carried on across thousands of moves, without any side willing to concede. But as the celestial and infernal experts seemed to have reached the limits of their abilities, they resorted to a new desperate measure. The legions of holy artifacts in their possession were summoned one after the other, each pure self and true self wielding as many as they could endure. In tandem, they hurled them all at Conrad, but before the artifacts could reach him, their hands flashed in incantation gestures, and inflated by both their manipulations and full might, the thousands of holy artifacts detonated, the explosion releasing an unprecedented conflagration able to take the life of anyone beneath the divine blood or spirit ranks. In fact, even early-stage divine blood and spirit experts could not survive. This time, all believed Conrad doomed, and when the conflagration swallowed him, a bright smile was plastered on all their lips. At last, the disaster is removed. The celestial and infernal leaders both thought upon witnessing this scene. No matter how abnormal he was, even Conrad should have a limit. This strike wasn't something he could survive. After all, throughout this clash, the troops clearly managed to bring out the full might of his abilities. With what else was he going to resist? Now, they should clean all his supporters, recover their people, and devise a plan to take control of the tower. And then it clicked. Wait, why is the tower's screen not vanishing? They wondered. According to logic, when Conrad perished, the tower's screen should die with him. Why was it then that it remained standing? Could it be? The thought swirled within their minds, but even they couldn't believe it. Impossible. It simply wasn't possible. Meanwhile, Gulistan, who observed this scene with her father, couldn't help but smile. And seeing her lips curl into such a bright smile, Birkin arched his eyebrows. Are you not afraid for your life? If at his current level, he can overcome this hurdle, in the near future, who can save you? He asked in a cold tone that betrayed no emotion. If he weren't this good, it would be no fun. Having spent a lifetime without worthy peers, how can I not anticipate our future confrontations? She replied while keeping her eyes locked on the holy conflagration. And as all wondered what remained of Conrad, the blue sky experienced startling changes, its color turning into pure jade while myriads of stars appeared within. But it was daytime. Why were stars appearing? And in such shocking number at that? But as all wondered what the source of this phenomenon was, from within the conflagration, a creature emerged. Or rather, gargantuan heads emerged. The gargantuan heads of a 1,000 meters tall jade serpent whose body now bloated the sky. 1, 2, 3. One after the other, the heads emerged from the cloud left by the explosion, and when the last one rose, all could see that this gargantuan serpent possessed 1,000 heads. Right, 1,000. The serpent's golden eyes shone with dazzling light, while on his 1,000 foreheads, 3 pairs of horns stood. And above each head, a jade sun and moon hovered, surrounded by 7 astral bodies. Boo! The appearance of that nightmarish creature startled the world. And when its maws opened, releasing a voice akin to Conrad's, all failed to believe it, because this creature simply defied all cognition. What is that? The celestial and infernal experts wondered in a stupor while recoiling at the mere presence of this being. That, my friends, is God. Or you may call me the first world devourer. Conrad's voice thundered and spread across the ancient crystal world. Having pushed me to reveal this form, you can be proud of yourselves. However, the fight is over, and it is time for you to feed my voracious hunger. Ha 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 ha. Conrad's malefic laugh and frightening words reverberated within his foes' minds. And this time, they finally accepted that they kicked an iron sheet, leaped into a volcano, and thrown themselves into a hopeless situation. Seeking salvation, they turned heels and tried running toward the ceiling dome, hoping to force their way out. However, innate skill, devouring, Conrad opened his maw, releasing an irresistible suction force that broke all his opponent's energies and barriers to trap them under its yoke. At his mercy, the more than 1,600 surviving experts flew toward his 1,000 maws and dived down his throat. By the time they entered his body, all were shredded by a dreadful force and flawlessly refined. At the same time, their deaths released massive death essence and souls Conrad didn't let off. All was devoured. He then turned his eyes toward the 60 million barbarian troops below. Sorrowful ants, living in existence controlled by your masters, and perishing for nothing? Those words awoke those dazed soldiers to the reality of their situation, and knowing they couldn't escape, all dropped on their knees. Your profane highness, mercy, we beseech you to spare our lives. From now on, we shall faithfully serve you. Mercy, mercy, mercy. 60 million voices exploded in grief and anguish. However, their words failed to move Conrad. I have no use for you. When your deaths serve me more than your lives, why should you live? Conrad replied, and again, opened his maw. The 60 million troops were immediately trapped by the devouring skill, and all flew toward Conrad's maws. No, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Please have mercy. Mercy, mercy, mercy. They roared, but to avail. All vanished within. 60 million lives thus turned into death essence and souls for the voracious Conrad to feast on. His second death flower bloomed. And was it not for him being stranded at the first layer, he could have condensed several more. Meanwhile, his resilience and regeneration abilities had reached an unprecedented level. Even if he wished to perish, it would be a daunting task. Anatole, Draven, and all the leading members of the infernal cult and celestial church trembled, shaken by violent tremors. More than 90% of our forces beneath the divine rank. Legions of outstanding relatives, all fallen. Artifacts and puppets, lost. Our foundation is broken. A dazed Anatole whispered, in slow motion while struggling to remain standing. Meanwhile, when he realized how the Circers washed their hands of this fight, and only dispatched worthless troops, Draven felt himself duped and his eyes went bloodshot. However, better than me, you should know that the Holy Continent is not just your domain, it is your prison. As long as you step outside, you can only perish. Anatole stated, attempting to suppress Conrad's confidence. And indeed, his words were sensible. Although for the current Conrad death was no simple matter, in a real confrontation, he couldn't resist the two factions' leaders. All agreed on this truth. But I'm only a rising saint. Although at the moment, cultivation isn't a critical part of my strength, as it grows, its might multiplies. By the time I reach star connection, in this world, who can challenge me? To say nothing of my improving divine physiques. I only need to bring one to the mastered stage, and you can surrender your lives. Meanwhile, my cultivation speed is far beyond what you can fathom. Your point is moot. Conrad retorted, undisturbed by Anatole's words. How many years would he need to reach star connection? 10? 15? Although due to the strange energies within his body, Anatole couldn't use his origin sight to access his true age, he didn't doubt that Conrad was nothing more than a youth. A saint's lifespan was 10,000 years. With Conrad's current appearance, he definitely was less than 1,000 years old. And considering the discrepancy between his horrifying battle power and cultivation, Anatole hypothesized that his breakthrough was recent. Perhaps he wasn't even 100 years old. Such a monster was doomed to rise at breakneck speed. Anatole didn't doubt that in the near future, even he couldn't restrain him. A sigh escaped his lips. You've made your points and displayed your might. Killing them serves no purpose besides indulging your pettiness. For my son, I'm willing to complete an exchange, even an unreasonable one. As long as you drop the nonsense about concubines, anything is discussable. Anatole declared, his clear tone showing neither hesitation nor falsehood. Conrad was startled. Never did he expect Anatole's love for his son to go to such an extent. Among the leaders of great factions, this level of paternal love was, at best, unusual. The heavenly star bow in your possession. Give it to me, and I can return your son to you. Conrad directly asked, and hearing this, the celestial elders all rushed toward the scene, and regardless of race and clans, shook their heads in disapproval. Church leader, you absolutely cannot. The heavenly star bow is the most powerful weapon of our church. Your ancestor received it from the founder due to their meritorious services. Although it belongs to Houseworth, calling it one of the foundations of the celestial church is not an exaggeration. Under no circumstances can it fall into the hands of outsiders. They roared in tandem, setting all their differences aside to convince Anatole of not taking this suicidal road. However, they'd underestimated his resolve. Like you said, it is my family's weapon, and I'm Houseworth's head. Profane prince, I'm willing. But how can I make sure you will keep your hand of the bargain? Again, Conrad was startled. Sun spirits indeed were incomparably passionate individuals. This level of familial devotion was a rare sight in the cultivation world. And at that time, the third infernal elder's voice echoed. As long as you can provide me enough insurance, I'm also willing to surrender my house's #1 artifact. Although it can't compare to the heavenly star bow, it still can't be underestimated. Conrad's 2,000 eyes swept those loyal fathers with incredulity. Impressed? I'm impressed. Very well, I can return your children in exchange for those items. We will sign a mutual obligation contract. Conrad replied, and in a twister of jade light, the contract was drafted. Both Anatole and the third cult elder could read the demonic language. Therefore, they could see its simple content. In exchange for their mightiest artifacts, Conrad pledged to return their children alive, without any further damage. The contract flew toward them, and immediately they signed it. Seeing this, a strange glint flashed within Conrad's eyes. Chapter 276, Contracted Bail Part 2. Afterward, the two surrendered their artifacts. My word is my bond. You can retrieve your whelps, Conrad declared, then wrapped both Erhardt and the third cult elder's son in a green orb before sending them past the barrier to land before their respective parents. Seeing their half-flayed states, said parents showed various reactions. The third cult elder and Anatole's wife didn't conceal their profound ire, while Anatole struggled to maintain his composure. But ultimately, he did. After all, Erhardt was alive, and that's what mattered most. As long as the spark of life remained, all physical wounds could be healed. Without delay, he directed his divine power toward Erhardt's wounds, using a sixth circle restorative spell to mend them at the fastest pace. In a flash, they were all mended, and Erhardt returned to his regular appearance. The third infernal cult elder did the same, and his son regained consciousness. Father, Erhardt whispered as his eyes awoke to Anatole's. At the same time, the third elder's son was recovering his consciousness and speaking similar words. However, Anatole was startled to see Erhardt's eyes going bloodshot, and his lips trembled. Like balloons, Erhardt and the third elder's son's heads inflated before their parents' eyes and exploded before either of them could react. Their bones, blood, and brain debris splattered their relatives, and thus they perished. Anatole couldn't believe his eyes, and his eyelids trembled. But as he shifted his eyes toward his wife and saw the same stupor within her hues, he was forced to admit that this was the reality. In a violent outburst, he spun toward Conrad. "Dastardly son of a whore. We signed a contract. How could you?" Demonic contracts were binding agreements. One couldn't break them without retribution. "I said I would return them alive and without further damage. I never said I would free them of the poison. I've been experimenting on them. That poison reacts to healing force. If you heal them, their heads explode. If you don't, nothing happens." Conrad leisurely replied, then returned to his human form. "Therefore, I didn't harm them. You did. Celestial Church Leader, Third Infernal Elder, it was a pleasure doing business with you." Conrad chortled and turned heels, vanishing to return to his imperial palace, thus leaving behind the still-dazed experts. Of course, he didn't leave Bayeyes behind. Aesiowarg, Earhart's mother howled, while holding on her son's shoulders, then passed out in grief. "Conrad, I swear not to rest until I feast on your corpse. Regardless of the cost, I will destroy you." Anatole pledged, then carried both his son's corpse and his wife to return to the Celestial Church's headquarters. Reappearing in the throne room, Conrad's eyes swept Yvonne and Else, who looked at him as if staring at a freak. For indeed, with his new bloodline and abilities, freak was the only word they could think of when laying eyes on him. But after this brief moment of stupor, they regained their composure. "You've made thorny archnemeses. Now, it's very likely that the final holy war will not be between the Celestial Church and the infernal cult." Else began, and hearing her words, Conrad smirked. "You're right. It will be Celestial Church and infernal cult versus our profane prince cult. And after facing such a blow, they will not hesitate to use the merit steals." Conrad leisurely replied, but at that time, Yvonne raised an issue the other two had almost not considered. "Not necessarily. You've seen it yourself. The infernal cult's top-level troops didn't include the Circers. There was no violet or golden-blooded human among their forces." Meanwhile, within the infernal cult's headquarters, Birkin faced trial before Draven, the infernal cult's leader whose eyes revealed calm ire. The non-Circer elders all stood beside him. "Admit it, you knew. You knew very well the depth of that boy, and refused to dispatch your house's experts because you knew they wouldn't survive. Now, the Circers are the only one to come out unscathed from this confrontation. What a devious plan." Draven appraised while keeping his chilling gaze locked on Birkin. Hearing this, the mourning Third Elder's eyes went bloodshot. "Indeed, I knew. How could I not?" Birkin directly replied. At best, they were one step above half-bloods. Such an abysmal gap made no sense. Therefore, Conrad hypothesized that even the lower-ranked human bloodlines possessed vast latent powers that, for some reason, humans failed to tap into. Unlocking this strength would surely unravel many mysteries and new opportunities. Of course, he didn't delude himself into thinking this a simple task. After all, if he could think of this, others could. As Conrad's words ended, Amalia closed her eyes, appraising the proposal. Research had always been her favorite activity, and humanity a species shrouded in many mysteries. Mysteries that kindled her interest. However, recalling the previous events, she squinted. "I can agree to these terms. However, you'd have to do one thing for me first." Hearing this, Conrad's lips curled into a smile. "Oh, and what would that be?" "Simple. Kill Yvonne. She and I cannot coexist. To have one, you must forsake the other." Although it stemmed from Ulrich's intrigues, it was by Yvonne's hands that Amalia's two other sons died. Having never forgotten this slight, there was simply no way for her to work in the same team as Yvonne. But she didn't expect that as soon as the words echoed, Conrad's smile brightened. "Oh, really? Good, very good. Conrad chortled, and no longer restrained his pheromones. Thanks to his transformation, his orchid scent had undergone drastic changes, with its might increasing several folds. As soon as that scent reached her nostrils, Amelia's eyes widened, her body trembled, and her cheeks flushed red. Now this is what I call audacity. How bold. How impudent. Yvonne is my wife, first among my women. When I'm not even calculating your involvement in her tribulation poison and your attack on her domain, you actually have the nerves to request her head. Impressive. Clearly, your late husband didn't teach you propriety. I will have to do it in his stead. Conrad stretched out his hand, causing jade-colored desire flames to rise from his index and dive into Amelia's chest. Instantaneously, all her resistance collapsed, and her eyes blazed with lust while her cunt drenched her panties in sexual juice. Despicable. She stammered and dropped on her front while rubbing her inner thighs. Despicable is my middle name. I can assure you that you will enjoy this more than me. Conrad leisurely replied before shifting Amelia's legs toward him. See how I spank the rebelliousness out of you. Chapter 278, Spanking Rebelliousness Out of the Dowager. Pulling her by the legs, Conrad laid Amalia on his lap, with her big, perky but facing him while her face remained pressed on the bed. A face that failed to contain the heat spreading throughout her body at breakneck speed and threatening to obliterate all her vows. First, Conrad gave her ass cheeks a good squeeze, assessing the texture and elasticity with a knowledgeable expert's seriousness. Top-grade goods. We are working with top-grade goods. Well done. Conrad appraised with a firm nod, and feeling the hands of a man other than her late husband groping her body, shame filled Amelia's eyes. How dare you? She stammered with increasingly ragged breathing. The only thing I don't dare do is nothing, Conrad leisurely replied before copping another feel. Just for safety measures, of course. He then pulled off his hands, then joined them in a prayer sign. Jade flames appeared and swirled around his hands, flames whose mere scent could kindle desire in the unprepared. Conrad pressed his hands back on Amelia's rear, cupping one ass cheek within each hand and massaging her, but through the fabric of her clothes her pussy juices stained at a rapid pace. Ah! When the flames of ecstasy snuck past her clothes and bummed to infiltrate her body, Amalia couldn't help but let out a small moan. Unwilling to let such a thing occur again, she bit the bedsheets beneath her, hoping to silence her expressions of pleasure. But due to the ecstasy flames relaxing her body, when Conrad raised his hand, arming it for the first smack, she couldn't even bring herself into clenching her backside. Asterisk smack. Star. Conrad's left palm descended on Amelia's right, but cheek, while the left one remained cupped in his other hand. The spanking sound soared toward the ceiling, spreading throughout the room while Amelia's supple but jiggled upon impact. Oh! Amalia squealed, unable to restrain herself while her eyes widened in disbelief. That single spank brought alongside it a contradictory mixture of pain and delight. A disgraceful mixture that filled her mind with eagerness for the second one. And this was only the first. After the 10th or 20th, how low would she fall? Look, everything is negotiable. You don't need to go so. Amalia began, but alas, too late. I give you an inch, you take a mile. A hand, you want the whole arm. That being the case, do not blame me for being merciless. Conrad replied before lifting Amelia's dress to reveal her bare butt, then raising his hand, again arming it for another strike. Wait. But wait, he did not. And this time, while his left palm smacked Amelia's right butt cheek, the right tended to her left, thus turning the dowager's backside into a beating drum. Smack, smack, smack. At first, she vainly attempted to muffle her moans by keeping her teeth and hands clenched on the bedsheets. But as the spanking carried on, and enrapturing pleasure filled her body and clouded her mind, she could no longer restrain herself and moaned in delight. Ooh-ho-oh! Amalia squealed while the relentless smacking of her rear carried on. Smack, 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 smack. Conrad spanked her harder and faster, the pace shooting up with Amelia's pleasure and the tonality of her moans. Delight shone on her dazed face, and her eyes glazed with lust while Conrad's punishing hands brought her to the edge. Smack, and with the last smack, she went over it. "Oh my God, I'm coming." Arching her back, Amalia squealed and orgasmed on Conrad's lap, her gushing juices soaking her panties, thighs, and the bedsheet below. Her face then dropped on the bed with her tongue lolling out. If there was such a thing as proper humiliation, she firmly believed that this was the most reasonable shame she would experience in her life. But, of course, Conrad was only getting started. Now I see the truth. From the start, this is what you were aiming for. And I entertained you thinking I was punishing you. What a dastardly plan. Silly. I'm so silly. Conrad realized while slapping his forehead. Shameless. Amalia sobbed. But then, a new pair of arms grew from Conrad's sides. First, he coated his fingers with his demonic saliva, then renewed the flames of ecstasy, and stretched the four hands toward Amalia. In a deft move, he flipped her on her back and lowered her dress to reveal those bountiful breasts she kept hidden beneath. One hand aimed at her still dripping cunt, another at her puckered butthole, and the last two fell on her breasts. The still dazed Amalia slightly shivered, fearing and anticipating what was about to happen to her. "Since I've been taken advantage of, I might as well go all out," Conrad declared before getting to work. His four hands assailed their targets, the first two fingering Amelia's cunt and butthole, while the last two fondled her breasts and teased her nipples. Attacked on too many fronts, it didn't take a minute before Amalia collapsed in another orgasm. And then another one. And again, another one. Soon, the pleasure completely possessed her mind and threatened to drive her into madness. "Ooh, you're killing me. Stop, wait, oh. Don't stop, don't stop." Amalia squealed while Conrad's fingers wantonly toured her body. "I can't take any more, Mercy." Her moaning voice was so loud that soon, it spread throughout the entire imperial palace, and all became aware that the stately Empress Dowager had fallen from her grace. "Will you behave?" Conrad asked while pulling out his fingers. Amalia had now turned into a startling mess, her juice forming a large puddle that drenched the whole bed while her body trembled and drool dripped from either corner of her wide-open mouth. "If you say A, I won't dare say B." Completely vanquished, she surrendered to her fate. Satisfied, Conrad nodded in approval and unbuckled his pants, revealing his hard, throbbing rod that ached for its share of bliss. Seeing the meat rod appear and lower itself toward her snatch, Amelia's trembling intensified. "Wait, that's two. Because you think that at this juncture, you can still be considered faithful to your late husband? Delusional." Conrad shook his head and aligned his profane shaft with Amelia's moist entrance. In a tantalizingly slow motion, Conrad inserted it, making sure that Amalia would forever remember this instant when a second man filled her body. And fill he did. Oh, so full. She whimpered as Conrad's girth conquered her insides, and his cock settled within her. Pleasure-driven, she spread her legs to give him better access while he held her waist to fully impale her on his rod and ready her for the impending hammering. Conrad glided his shaft back to the entrance, the move eliciting a new whimper from Amalia, before again shoving himself to the hilt in one rapid thrust. The pounding then began, with Conrad hammering his cock into Amelia's cave while his hips danced against her waist to hit the spot that brought her the most pleasure. Mid-hammering, he released his golden and jade lights, creating a sharp pleasure increase that filled the already crumbling dowager with debilitating pleasure. And as Conrad plowed her field, the memory of her late husband vanished in the back of her head. Moans became animalistic grunts, and in that instant, Amalia probably couldn't remember her name or recognize her reflection in a mirror. Conrad's pace shot up, going in and out at a superhuman speed until his rod ached for release, and he unleashed his spunk within Amelia's snatch. Ooh, yes. She groaned in an orgasm of her own and lost her last bit of strength. Conrad then flipped her on her front, still holding her by the waist to hammer her from behind through several hours of barbaric mating at the end of which he induced Amalia into a contract whose nature she didn't give a damn about. Now that the two factions' armies have been obliterated and my goal met, it's time we proceed with the official abolition of the 5 states and the coronation ceremony. I have already contacted my avatars to have the various rulers bring their crowns and imperial seals to officially abdicate their thrones. The Great Void Emperor, the Profound Sea Emperor, the Prosperous Wind Emperor, and the Earth Alliance King are on their way as we speak. Conrad explained. However, they won't be the only one. I plan to erase the sovereign prince title and the hereditary ownership of fiefs. All land under the sky belongs to the emperor. Princely identification to the imperial family. Neither should be owned by non-imperial kin. Therefore, all sovereign princes will have to officially renounce their rights. Conrad declared, his words startling the gathered folks. As the targeted audience, Wilfried and Hubert were particularly alarmed. Their houses had been hereditary rulers of vast domains for more than 100,000 years. Their fiefs were large enough to be vast kingdoms of their own, and their titles passed down for generations. How could they simply surrender such dignity? Isn't this too extreme? One man cannot rule all. What can you possibly achieve by doing this? Hubert inquired. After all, House Voigt was the most ancient of the Uridal houses. As the previous rulers of this land, their history predated the Holy Flame Empire. How could Hubert so readily surrender the land of his ancestors? From now on, governors will be assigned, and some of the larger domains quartered into new provinces. We will switch from half to full bureaucratic system with magistrates, grand administrators, prefects, and governors assigned based on skills. Cultivation plays no role in the ability to administrate. Therefore, to maximize the growth of this land, I will look at talent before anything else. The nobility will switch to an honorary status with rank determined by cultivation. The higher the rank, the more privileges will be afforded. The new top rank will be Archduke, but all will be restrained to the capital. A capital we will expand. The construction of talent assessing centers can now spread to the entire continent. From those new talents, we shall breed a new army. The country will be divided into castes unable to interfere with one another. The gentry for official and administrative matters, the warriors for military matters, the priesthood for the faith, and the merchants for commerce. As the bulk of our continent's cultivation power, the nobility is encouraged to join the warrior and priest castes. With your cultivation, you will naturally stand at the summit of the warrior caste. But I must warn you that in my administration, to receive key training, swallowing one of my orchids is a must. Conrad replied. Of course, his words failed to satisfy Hubert, who could only grit his teeth in disappointment. And as their fathers sought support in their eyes, neither Yvonne nor Else made comments. They then discussed various other issues, and as the discussion reached its end, Conrad added, the coronation ceremony will be followed by my grand wedding. On that occasion, I will wed Yvonne as my Jade Empress, Else and Verena as my Jade Consorts, Jasmine, Ileana, Nils, and Daphne as my divine consorts. All will take positions according to their ranks. However, my consorts will not live in the imperial palace. They already have reserved spots in the Tower of Rebirth. Afterward, you fathers-in-law will be sealed as grand pillars. No one expected Conrad to simultaneously wed 7 women after the coronation ceremony. But, of course, none raised objections. After all, in the current holy continent, Conrad was no different from God. No, he was God. And God's will was inviolable. The council dispersed, and the preparative for the coronation ceremony and wedding began. For this reason, After the first batch that came from the higher realms, none could reach the peak of divine transformation and break through divine ascension. Never did the Great Elder expect that Anatole managed where all others failed. I've already said I would give you the seat. Why must you still pressure me? Can a man not mourn his loss? Can a father not mourn his son? What law within heaven and earth forbids me from having this moment of peace? Must I kill you all before you understand proper limitations? Laced with an invisible force, Anatole's words hacked at his suppressed peers' bones and organs, brutalizing them from within. Even the Great Elder could not resist. Starting with the divine rank, each breakthrough triggered a monstrous strength leap, a leap that only grew with higher ranks. At divine transformation, each level was comparable to the gap between early divine blood/spirit and early divine transformation. What are wealth, glory, and splendor before the hearth of our house? Before the shared warmth of our beloved? I do not care for such trivial dignities, because they are not worth caring for. Anatole declared while turning toward the elders who now knelt on the ground, trembling before his might. Church leader, they began, but before they could finish their words, Anatole cut them dry. No church leader. Don't you want me to abdicate? Very well, I retire. You can take my badge of office. However, I must warn you, the days ahead hold nothing good for you. Anatole's words awoke the Great Elder to the new reality of things. With this breakthrough, even if he took the church leader's seat, if Anatole so wished, he would still hold all powers. That seat he couldn't take. Please forgive our impudence. We were narrow-minded and failed to share your burdens. Never again will such a breach occur. He pledged, renouncing his claim. And seeing this, Anatole sneered. As you wish. Surrender your house's merit reserves. I plan to use both house and church merit to begin a summoning ritual. Using our years of accumulation, we will permanently summon several celestial realm divine ascension devis from mighty noble houses to lead us against our foes. With their strength and backgrounds, they should have a way to dispose of the anti-divine power screen. Anatole's order struck the kneeling elders like a bolt of lightning, and many of them failed to accept those words. But if we do that, we're forcing the infernal cult into doing the same. Please remember the tales of the First Holy War. Once a battle between forces of that level begins, how many of us can survive? Worse, to the celestial realm, we're nothing more than glorified ants. How will those devis treat us when they descend? Please reconsider. The Great Elder exclaimed, unwilling to see the situation reach such a stage. However, he'd underestimated both Anatole's determination and the depth of his hatred. To achieve great things, one must be willing to take risks. If you're not willing to take this gamble, as Great Elder, you serve no purpose. Meanwhile, within the barbarian continent's forbidden and most dreadful zone, Gulistan and Birkin stood before a gargantuan tree. Chapter 281 The World Tree Whales, The Hidden Forest. If there were one place all across the barbarian continent avoided like the plague, regardless of cultivation, it would be the Hidden Forest. It bore that name because of a broom that clouded its entrance, an entrance not many dared brave in the first place. Across the ancient crystal world's history, beneath the divine rank, none managed to make their way out of the Hidden Forest. And even above the divine rank, those who did often failed to reconstruct the events they'd experienced there. Only a scant few could go in and out unscathed. Birkin and Gulistan were naturally among those. And now, they stood before the ancient crystal world's tallest tree, a 100 kilometers tall tree whose branches stretched across several miles. And looking at that tree, for once, Gulistan's face shone with gravity. Asterisk Uwuyuwin. Star. Asterisk Uwuyuwin. Star. Asterisk Uwuyuwin. Star. A succession of wailing sounds akin to that of toddlers echoed from that tree, and hearing them, neither Gulistan nor Birkin could keep a straight face. The world tree whales, Gulistan stated, the 4 words carrying incomparable gravity. gravity that put even her shoulders under crushing pressure. This 100 kilometers tall tree was the ancient crystal world tree. In mortal worlds, world trees were the sources of spiritual energy. Without one, cultivation was nigh impossible. For that reason, worlds devoid of world trees were referred to as barren worlds. The wailing sound of a world tree was a disastrous omen, an omen heralding an era even Birkin dreaded. And indeed, as the wailing sound echoed, a faint shade of gray began spreading across the previously green tree. Seeing this, Birkin's frown deepened, and he stretched his hand toward the world tree. However, a formidable force field rose to repel his hand, preventing it from getting any closer to the world tree. Undaunted, Birkin released the full might of his cultivation. However, even his divine ascension cultivation base wasn't enough to break through the barrier. This meant that on the current ancient crystal world, depending on might alone, no one could force his way in. Defeated, Birkin pulled back his hand and lowered his gaze toward the fruits at the base of the tree. Those were life fruits, the most valuable nutrients for nurturing physiques to the pinnacle. They grew at precise intervals, and before, the top experts of the two faiths would compete to rob them for their own. But now, no one had access to them. Meanwhile, Guliston's eyes never left the gray shade that slowly but surely stretched across the tree. And at that time, a rumbling sound came from the earth below, soaring toward the sky where the two sages hovered. Their frowns further deepened. "Let's return," Birkin ordered, and in a golden haze, vanished alongside Guliston to return to House Circer. The two appeared in the Circer elders' meeting room, and as soon as they did, all rose to greet them. Lord Burke. However, before the elders could finish their greetings, their patriarch's voice echoed. "No need. The situation looks grim. I'm afraid the world tree's withering began," Birkin declared, the words startling the Circer elders who, despite their age and experience, failed to shoulder such a blow. The withering, then that means the ancient crystal world spirituality. An elder began, and before he could finish his words, "is coming to an end?" Guliston cut. Her confirmation caused the elder's eyes to widen in disbelief. How could this be? The ancient crystal world's cultivation history is merely of 1 million years. What mortal world ever suffered withering after 1 million years? This is completely unheard of. Another elder exclaimed, his tone full of fright, and none could blame him. Although the withering didn't claim lives, it completely shattered a world's cultivation future. Resources would stop growing. Refining the energy between heaven and earth would become impossible. Crystals would no longer produce any spiritual, holy, or divine energy, and life fruits would stop sprouting. The cultivation world would instantaneously be thrown into irreversible decline, the end of which being the end of cultivation. How could they not be startled? Indeed, this situation is abnormal, and I suspect this disaster of being man-made. Birkin replied, causing more confusion within the hearts of his house's elders. As you all know, when the world tree withers, its leaves turn into formidable weapons possessing two invincible abilities effective on all targets beneath godhood. At that juncture, whoever controls the access to them is undoubtedly the ancient crystal world's sovereign. Guliston and I have examined the scene, and a barrier now wards the world tree. A barrier even I cannot break through. Moreover, beneath the ground, a hidden force brews. If I am not wrong, that force should be the Zenith Ants. Birkin hypothesized. Impossible. Those rogue demons have long since been exterminated by our founder. How could they possibly remain within this world? Another elder opposed, but Birkin shook his head. Nothing is set in stone. It's not impossible that a few survived and chose to bide their time. In any case, regardless of the reason, the fact of the matter is that the withering began. Now, unless a world god rises to master the world, this planet's cultivation realm is doomed. We only have two choices: either support someone to become the ancient crystal world god in the coming years or hasten the holy war, make our faith supreme, then rush toward the infernal realm. Birkin concluded. But for now, the infernal cult enters an emergency mode. We must start preparing for the inevitable and put the little that remains of our merit reserves to good use. Merit reserves were divided between house and cult merit, with house merit being unique to the given houses, and cult merit serving as the overall reserve. The Circers lost all their merit reserves to summon Talroth, a risky move that could have ended with no reward besides death. Afterward, they squandered a vast quantity of cult merit to unleash a plague Conrad turned to his advantage and ended up gaining nothing from it. Now, the cult's reserves were at disturbing levels. Although thanks to Talrotha's boons, their house was undoubtedly the ancient crystal world's #1. They knew that if they didn't tread carefully, the future didn't look bright. And while analyzing the current events, Gulistan deeply regretted her previous move. If she received Marduk's body from Conrad and exchanged it to the merit steel, the situation could never be this critical. In the meantime, Conrad was standing before his refinery cauldron, about to melt several materials and divine artifacts to form his new crown and seal. One of the system rewards of the previous quest. Chapter 282 I Am Way Too Rich. A carefree Conrad stood before the refinery cauldron obtained from the system with several high-grade divine materials floating around him. The refinery cauldron was an exceedingly powerful tool that inarguably made Conrad the most skilled alchemist across the 3 realms. Through it, he could either meld artifacts into brand new wholes or extract the ingredients that composed them. He also possessed great control over the shape of the artifact that came out, able to use his mind to control the result's appearance as long as it stood within reason. Meanwhile, with the tower having made him the wealthiest individual in the history of the ancient crystal world, in the previous battle against Celestial Church and Infernal Cult, beneath the god rank, there was virtually no artifact he wasn't able to refine. And for his badges of office, he naturally wanted the best. Therefore, he first brought forth the ingredients for his crown and seal. Then, using his thoughts as guide, merged them all within the refinery cauldron. Afterward, Conrad sacrificed several divine artifacts, turning them into fuel for his crown, then released several drops of god blood into the mix. He then joined his hands, causing the refinery cauldron to release a massive white blaze from which a new golden crown encrusted with 9 imperial jade beads appeared within the air. He did the same for his seal, thus creating 2 divine artifacts of the highest caliber in less than a minute. In fact, due to being blessed by godblood, those artifacts didn't lose out to the Celestial Church's heavenly star bow. Of course, with his current cultivation, although his holy sense stood far beyond the limits of his rising saint rank, Conrad couldn't use more than a fraction of their power without suffering severe backlash. If I could comprehend the first layer of the absolute war sense, even with my current cultivation, I could make use of more than half their power. With the second layer, simultaneously wielding the 2 of them would come at no cost. A pity, Conrad assessed. As ancient secrets, the blossoming death art, the absolute war sense, and seer's vision were by far his 3 mightiest arts. But for that very same reason, each carried tremendous cultivation difficulty. With his unparalleled cultivation talent, even Conrad took 2 weeks to comprehend the first layer of the blossoming death art. As for the second one, he estimated that 2 years of secluded cultivation were the bare minimum. At that rate, even with the tower's assistance, simultaneously cultivating the 3 would be a heaven-defying task, consuming more time than the world had to offer. Meanwhile, Seer's vision and the absolute war sense contradicted one another, making cultivating the 2 nigh impossible. But with their fantastic abilities, Conrad was truly unwilling to give up on either one. With a sigh, he set the golden jade crown and imperial jade seal aside. There was no such thing as god-rank arts. Or more accurately, god-rank arts and methods were unique to each deity, bred from their Tao and comprehension of the laws. They couldn't be passed on to others. Therefore, throughout the 3 realms, divine rank arts were the typical limit. Then came ancient secrets which didn't have creators and existed from the beginning of times. There were 12 in total, with the Supreme Conqueror Sutra being the mightiest of them all. Not many gods could create an art that rivaled even the weakest of ancient secrets. Therefore, many deities battled to obtain their knowledge. Conrad had received this information from all the infernal souls he refined. And as he pondered how to conciliate those two arts, a knocking sound came from the door. "Come on in," Conrad ordered, and one of his pale-skinned, female legionaries stepped in, bringing alongside her a neatly folded golden robe. "Master, this is the imperial robe embroidered by Lady Ileana," she explained while unfolding the golden robe embroidered with a 10-headed horned serpent. Throughout the ancient crystal world, only in Conrad's palace could one see a woman of such cultivation level handling such menial tasks. "Oh, how thoughtful of her. You can cancel the weaving of the other one." Conrad beckoned, causing the robe to leave the beauty's hands to fly toward him. While holding it in suspension, he tossed 30 drops of godblood into the cauldron, extracting its power before throwing the robe inside. The red flame again blazed, and the robe soared, unblemished and now glittering with a formidable force. With that simple move, Conrad made this otherwise ordinary robe more resilient than the average high-grade divine artifact. And in the instant it landed into his hands, Conrad couldn't help but sigh. Being rich surely makes life easier. I'm rich. So rich that I don't know what to do with my richness anymore. Has anyone seen such wealth? Why isn't there a law against being too rich? Throughout the mortal realm, can anyone compete with me? If I'd known being a grave robber was this rewarding, I would have majored in that craft years ago. A pity. Conrad lamented, his words causing the nearby beauty's eyes to widen in disbelief. Never did she expect that her Grand Master also possessed such a peculiar side. Was this really the soon-to-be August Jade Emperor, the profane prince that held the Holy Continent in awe? Spread my order, we will start charities across the Holy Continent, give shelter to the orphans, and raise them into loyal servants of the faith, Conrad ordered before sending the 3 items into the beauty's hands. Though startled, she quickly nodded in approval. As you command, Master. Oh, and by the way, how did the execution go? Conrad inquired. Since the deadline arrived, he didn't spare Bayeyes, having him executed in the middle of the city square. However, the Circer's death was of so little consequence that Conrad didn't bother attending to the execution, instead making it an attraction for his citizens. As you ordered, we first flayed Bayeyes' Circer until only the meat beneath his skin remained, then drowned him half an inch into death while preparing unique worms that gnawed him from the inside. He danced for a long time. Afterward, he was hanged, drawn, and quartered. The Beast Lady replied before pulling out a crystal ball she presented to Conrad. Within, Bayeyes' soul remained. As a quasi-sage with a half-complete divine seed, even without his body, Bayeyes' soul maintained spiritual consciousness and thrashed within the crystal ball. Conrad nodded in approval. Well done. After the coronation, you and the other legionaries within the palace can return to the tower to carry on with your training. You must all reach the infernal knight rank at the fastest pace possible. Conrad ordered while pulling the crystal ball into a space treasure. The Beast Lady nodded, then excused herself, bringing alongside her the 3 imperial items to carry on with the next part of the coronation. Seriousness then returned to Conrad's eyes. It's time to claim my throne and complete the current quest. Chapter 283 Coronation Ceremony. With the end of another plague day and the fall of legions of unbelievers, the last recalcitrant citizens, those that for one reason or another desperately clung onto the Cardinal Lord's faith, all submitted to the profane prince's cult. And on the next morning, the word cult was removed and officially replaced by faith. During that night, Conrad's zealots stamped out any reminders of the Cardinal Lords, destroying all their books and crushing all statues and edifices reminiscing of the previous faith. The faith's hierarchy was also established, with Conrad occupying the highest seat as the profane prince. Beneath him were the matriarchs, the grand priestesses, and the blessed. Only after them did the male ranks begin. For indeed, within the profane prince faith, because those women had all been favored by Conrad, they all by default occupied higher positions than men. As long as a woman successfully offered herself to an orchid altar and received the profane prince's sexual favors, her cultivation would rise to the holy rank, and she would automatically be promoted to blessed. And seeing some of their longtime friends suddenly turn into celestial beings, regardless of marital status, many considered taking the cloth. Of course, not everyone could receive such grace. On the following morning, legions of men and women, the entirety of the clergy and the nobility, assembled beneath the grand imperial altar, a newly built edifice, to await the beginning of Conrad's coronation. On that day, within the sky, auspicious clouds assembled, as if to herald the beginning of a new golden age. After waking him with a matinal blowjob, the two pale-skinned restoration beast beauties dressed Conrad in his imperial robe, preparing him for the upcoming ceremony. "Has everyone taken their spots?" Conrad asked while stretching his neck. "Yes, master. From the lowest lords to the highest emperors, all have taken their spots on the steps." The one tying Conrad's belt politely replied. "Very well. Let the show begin." Conrad declared and joined his hands beneath his large golden sleeves before stepping out of his chambers to head toward the grand imperial altar. A procession of 300 eunuchs followed in his tracks, while keeping their backs slouched in uncomfortable deference. Ulrich was among them. Following a 1-hour-long walk, they arrived at the site of the grand imperial altar, a massive pyramidal structure high of 9,999 steps. Starting with the 9,988th step, one could see thousands of nobles standing with their backs straight, each holding an insignia representing their function. At the 9,996th step, the sovereign princes stood. At the 9,997th, the Earth Kingdom Alliance's kings did, and at the 9,998th step, the three emperors remained. Hubert aside, none dared show the tiniest bit of dissatisfaction. Wilfrid Metz, Elsa's father, was a man who could endure. How patient he remained under the church's persecution, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike, was testimony enough to his endurance skills. But for Hubert, it was another story. Having enjoyed paramount status for millennia and being himself the proud serpent lord of an ancient lineage, today's events were not easy for him to swallow. And recalling how several months ago, Conrad was nothing but a gifted ant in his eyes, he couldn't help but sigh. As soon as Conrad's procession appeared, the legions of observers that formed two ordered camps at the bottom of the altar bowed in silent greeting. Though they came from 5 different states, all could feel the weight of the event, and under such a solemn atmosphere, none could afford the tiniest mistake. With his clasped hands still hidden beneath his golden sleeves, Conrad stepped forward, walking toward the stairs while releasing his jade-light aura. Once he reached the first step, he stopped, lifted his gaze toward the altar's summit where a gigantic mirror diffused the events to the holy continent, and stepped forward. The poised altar crossing began, and with each step, the pressure of Conrad's aura increased. By the time he reached the 9,988th step, the lords that occupied it had dropped on their knees and presented their tokens. Aware of our inferiority and unworthy of controlling the lives and deaths of the Holy Continent's citizens, we surrender our ancestral rights and seal to the only one able to shoulder this responsibility. They declared and dropped their tokens at Conrad's feet. He nodded and swept the tokens with his jade light, causing them to vanish into dust, then walked toward the next step. Aware of our inferiority and unworthy of controlling the lives and deaths of the Holy Continent's citizens, we surrender our ancestral rights and seal to the only one able to shoulder this responsibility. The barons repeated, and the same scene occurred. Then it was the viscounts, the counts, the margraves, the dukes, and the grand dukes. All landed nobles from across the Holy Continent surrendered their ancestral rights. The sovereign prince's turn arrived, and regardless of his personal feelings, alongside them all, Hubert dropped on his knees and proclaimed, "Aware of our inferiority and unworthy of controlling the lives and deaths of the Holy Continent citizens, we surrender our ancestral rights and seal to the only one able to shoulder this responsibility, the one true prince. They added an extra line through which they abandoned their princely distinctions, then released their tokens. And after a brief nod, Conrad destroyed them before moving one to the king's step. The same event repeated, and the various kings added their own line. The one true king, then released their tokens. Finally, Conrad reached the 9,998th floor where the emperors awaited. The Great Void Emperor, the Prosperous Wind Emperor, the Profound Sea Emperor. Of the three, the first two had been cucked, poisoned, and abused by Conrad's avatars through a masterful use of the harem. And both were remarkably sorrowful cases. As the Emperor of Heartlessness, it wasn't long before Great Void saw himself plotted against by all his consorts. Meanwhile, the Prosperous Wing Emperor, the only monogamous ruler of the secular world, was betrayed by his beloved wife and daughters. As for the Profound Sea Emperor, being Conrad's servant, his case was simple, and while he knelt alongside the other emperors, relief overflowed within his heart. Finally, he was freed of that false throne. Free, at last. The three repeated the same words as all the previous rulers, but added, the one true emperor. Their seals suffered the same fate of destruction before Conrad took his place on the 9,999th step. A jade light column descended from the sky, bringing alongside it the golden jade crown and imperial jade seal. In all other coronation ceremonies, the ascending ruler would bow toward the heavens. However, Conrad didn't bow, because, on this particular occasion, he was heaven. The crown dropped on his head while the seal stopped before his chest. Unclasping his hand, Conrad grabbed the imperial jade seal within his hands, then turned toward the legions of vassals below. Sweeping them with a glance, he raised the imperial jade seal which overflowed with divine might. All those at the ground, noblemen and clergymen, dropped on their knees. And throughout the Holy Continent, the commoners that witnessed this scene from the gigantic mirror followed suit. All hail the Jade Emperor. All hail your august majesty. Your majesty's reign shall stretch across eternity. Tens of billions proclaimed in tandem, and thus, Conrad took his seat as the first ruler of the Holy Continent. And in that instant, not many doubted that in the coming years, that title would be upgraded to ruler of the ancient crystal world. Hence began the August Jade Dynasty. Congratulations, profanely shameless emperor, host, on completing the 7th level of the main quest. Celine's voice echoed, and to prevent her from ruining his moment, Conrad made the sound decision of ignoring her for the rest of the night. Chapter 284 Grand Imperial Wedding. The coronation ceremony came to an end, making way for the next event, the Grand Imperial Wedding. Although arguably not as solemn as Conrad's establishment of the new dynasty, the Grand Imperial Wedding was an event of capital importance for the commoners who couldn't help but anticipate the sight of the women chosen to stand beside their god emperor. The festivities would also bring its own round of relaxation. I heard the previous dynasty's empress, holy consort, noble imperial consort, and princess were on the list. That is only rational. Only His August Majesty is qualified to enjoy the country's top beauties. The previous emperor was too greedy, attempting to hoard what didn't belong to him. Indeed, His August Majesty is really an example for us all. I heard his official harem already comprises hundreds of women, and he beds them all daily. That's natural. Our sovereign is God, omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. For him, that kind of thing requires no effort. Word is that after the coronation ceremony, he will recruit thousands of new women for his official harem. If a relative of ours can get a spot, how wonderful would that be? At the very least, we would be set up for life. For that chance, I'd sell my wife. Back on the altar, one after another, the abdicating nobles descended the stairs and vanished within the crowd, leaving only Conrad to gaze at the world below. A new procession made its way toward the altar. 300 palace maids backed by 84 eunuchs carrying 7 golden palanquins. Divided by the ranks of the one they carried, the eunuchs didn't all stand on the same line. The first 12 led the procession, then came 24 carrying 2 palanquins, and finally, the remaining 48. In each of the palanquins sat a lady dressed in a bright red gown. Initially, the Holy Continent used white as the color of marriage, but Conrad considered it unsuitable for showcasing passion and therefore switched to bright red. The procession reached the base of the altar, and the palanquins were lowered onto the ground. From them, 7 women emerged, each endowed with spellbinding looks that put the world in awe. The first 3, in particular, stood out. Matchless sex appeal, unparalleled beauty, and incomparable elegance. They each defined one of those aspects. As for the next 4, they wildly differed. In 2, the insouciance of youth lingered, making them lose out in mature charm. But simultaneously, that same insouciance enhanced their already enrapturing appeal. In the remaining 2, beguiling demonic charm overflowed. Any one of those demonesses was more than enough to trigger 100 Trojan wars and launch millions of ships. Those 7 beauties were naturally Yvonne, Else, Verena, Jasmine, Ileana, Nils, and Daphne. In tandem, they took their spots beneath the altar with Yvonne at the helm, Verena and Else on the second row, Jasmine, Ileana, Daphne and Nils on the third. In a twister of jade light, Conrad's imperial robe was replaced by a bright red gown matching that of the ladies, and he stretched his hand toward them. Their climb then began, a climb at the end of which they stopped before Conrad and knelt before him. A golden crown encrusted with 9 imperial jade beads appeared within Conrad's hands. That crown was 90% identical to his and forged in similar materials. With a smile, he lowered it onto Yvonne's head, sealing her as his empress. She then stood up to stand at his right. Afterward, it was Else and Verena's turn. Instead of crowns, they received golden jade diadems, with 8 imperial jade beads instead of 9. As for Jasmine, Ileana, Daphne, and Nils, their diadems were carved out of divine crystals. Once each consort received her badge of office, a myriad of swans descended from the sky to hover around the new imperial clan. A dazzling jade light road then appeared, going from the top of the altar all the way to the nuptial chambers. Jade Emperor and Empress stepped forward, followed by the 6 consorts to cross the ethereal road and walk into the nuptial palace. The swans then spread across the Holy Continent, raining blessings on the citizens. The old were rejuvenated, the maimed restored, and the ailing healed. Again, the world was in awe. Little did they know that those swans were Conrad's avatars. The billions of citizens thrice kowtowed in thanks, then swarmed the various banquet halls erected across the empire for this occasion to feast, drink, and orgy as per the profane prince's grace. Phew, what an exhausting procession. Does getting married have to be so tedious? Daddy, for the sake of the future generations, you must reduce the stress this involves. Daphne exclaimed once they stepped into the nuptial palace, her words causing her peers to roll their eyes. Hum. This is no longer acceptable. From now on, you can't call me Daddy anymore. In private, you either call me Conrad or husband. In public, you have to use honorifics. Conrad declared after clearing his throat, his words causing Daphne's eyes to widen in disbelief. What? Why? How could you so heartlessly disown your daughter? I'm not willing. Sniff, sniff. Daphne sobbed while rushing toward Conrad and grabbing his arm. Alas, his resolve stood firm. We're now the imperial family. Some decorum is necessary. Otherwise, when one of my high-ranking consorts is calling me Daddy Conrad before the masses, where does that put my imperial dignity? To say nothing of the fact that we're swindling the world into thinking I'm God. Conrad replied, using reason to quell that Daphne habit. Hearing this, Daphne aside, all nodded in approval. But, no but. If one day you have a daughter, what is she going to call me? Daddy, granddaddy? Half daddy, half granddaddy? The decision is final. But when the word daughter echoed within her mind, Daphne's eyes shone with dazzling light. All right, but you must work extra hard to give me a daughter. To think that with all the spunk you dump, we haven't already crossed that bridge. Asterisk sigh asterisk. At this rate, centuries will pass without little Daphne's. Could you be Impo? She immediately replied, causing black lines to form on Conrad's head. What do you know? That's called self-preservation. Self-preservation? If with every 3 loads I sired a snotty brat, throughout the 3 realms, who could save me? By the way, I warn you all, don't you dare give birth to sons. If any one of you does, I will skin the brat for baby fat and shove him back from whence he came. And hearing this unique exchange, the consorts all burst into laughter. Afterward, the 8 enjoyed a lively banquet full of divine-grade cultivation wine that filled them with small breakthroughs and drunken stupor, then clumped into the nuptial chambers. Conrad, for too long, you have run amok. You are just a teenaged boy, who here is not your senior by decades or centuries. A drunk Yvonne proclaimed, pulling approving nods from her similarly intoxicated peers. However, I'm not. The drunken Nils immediately replied. Silence. Aarg. And drunk Yvonne sent her flying on the bed. In any case, today, we must teach you a lesson. Ladies, to arms. Their clothes soon dropped onto the ground. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.